I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It states the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. Again, I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues. My name is Dave Beatty. I am one of your hosts. I'll be hiding behind the avatar this evening. I won't do it next week, but I'm going to do it this week. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer, worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of, such things as Batman Incorporated, Justice League of America, Grifter, and my current projects, Red Skirts, and my new company, Kirby Tees. But enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching or listening at home some of the fun things that you have worked on as a creative professional.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Base God 14. That's Base God 14. They're that way. Base God 14. That's Base God, not Bass God. That's bass like a bass guitar. And I am the co-host of Retro Rogues Live. I'm also the associate producer of a feature film called Occupants, which features Star Trek Voyager actor Robert Picardo and is currently available on Tubi. Oh, and PJ is in the house. Orville Nation is in the house. Hey guys. Hey, back to you, PJ. Good to see you.
Hi, PJ. Glad you're here. So do we want to just go ahead and get into the main topic, or do we have any? I know you and I have something we actually need to talk about. We've been talking about other things before the show got started, but I know there's a project that maybe hopefully soon we'll be able to talk about.
That's true. Yeah,
we're still share with everyone.
Still kind of working on it, right? So we are in those sort of early stages and kind of hopefully getting closer and closer to being able to actually share that stuff. But I am also working right now. I'm negotiating a deal to be involved with a short film that hopefully will come out within the next 6 months or so. That's what we're looking at our turnaround time. Can't get too much more into the details at this point because it's still sort of in the beginning stages, but I'm excited about it, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a fun project. And we do have some other folks in the Rogues Gallery. Donnie Pearson says hello at Base God 14, Dave and all. And hello, Donnie. It's good to have you in the Rogues Gallery and commenting.
Welcome back, Donnie. Glad you're here.
Thank you again for your... PJ is like our biggest cheerleader. It says this is the best effing show on YouTube. Thank you so much, PJ. We really appreciate you saying that. And we always appreciate you being such a good cheerleader. And as I always say, a real leader, I think, in the YouTube broadcasting community and sort of the broadcasting community in general. Jane's in the house, and she also says, hey, guys. So
hi, Mom.
Good to see you. Glad that you're over here in the Rogues Gallery. And then James is actually out here too as well. He says, always secrets. And I think he's talking about you, Dave, you and your secret ways, you know?
Well, it's, I guess kind of secretive at the moment. So, but there's a lot of fun things going on. I think, for example, something I'm not really prepared to talk about too much tonight, but Eric is aware of, as well as those people who actually follow me on Facebook and such. I've been tie-dyeing a bunch of T-shirts, learning how to do it, because pretty soon we're going to have some really killer tie-dyed Retro Rogues T-shirts, for example, available soon. So we got some fun things in the works. So and it'll all be hitting really soon. I don't have anything to show for it just yet, but I actually did a photo shoot on Sunday, actually with a model, actually taking shots of stuff actually for to model the clothing, the T-shirts and stuff actually for Kirby Tees, for example. So
that's very cool. Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to seeing those pics, as we were talking about that a little bit off the air. And of course, Kirby Tees is one of our official sponsors for our show. That's Dave's company. The other sponsor is Bad Bob Productions, which is my company. As I like to say, we have sold out to ourselves. So please check out Kirby Tees. And that photo that you did, I know you had it on your Twitter, and then I also shared it on my Twitter. If anybody's interested in checking out some of those tie dyes that you were putting out there, I did share that picture on my Twitter account.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, and we got all kinds of fun stuff coming up. The film Routine, for example, that I worked on. Routine is kind of getting into more and more into the film circuit. I think more and more people are going to get a chance to see it. So a lot of fun things going on.
That is fun. And I noticed I just kind of wanted to point this out because I saw PJ and Donnie talking to each other, and Donnie has a picture of him conducting, and PJ was asking him, "Are you a conductor?" He says, "This was from a music ensemble conducting class, where I took turns conducting the opening movement of a Beethoven symphony. No, not the fifth or the ninth." And then he said, "How are you, PJ?" I just thought that was interesting. The two of them were chatting. I thought I would just share that because I think that's really neat. That's really cool, Donnie.
Very cool. Very cool. So we're going to be reusing some graphics kind of here and there. I want to apologize. My week didn't exactly go as planned. My weekend, anyhow. But we're going to use a couple of graphics. Reuse the one for actually Lower Decks this week. I apologize. I shall be much more prepared next week. So if we're good, let's go ahead and get into this, Eric.
All right. Well, did you want to start off with your sort of general impressions, or did you want me to start off?
I am happy to start off. So we're going to talk about the second episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. This is, of course, available on CBS All Access. The title of this episode was Envoy. So my general impressions of this particular episode, it had some moments in it I really, really enjoyed. I think the first episode for me was actually much stronger than this particular episode, but they had some fun moments in it, and I generally enjoyed it. The one thing I do like about Lower Decks so far is that at least they feel more like Star Trek, at least the way I think of Star Trek. They're wearing uniforms. They're on, for example, the first shot of the Cerritos that we see in this episode could have been the first shot from like an episode of original series Star Trek or Next Gen or whatever, and it's the ship in orbit of a planet, and it was just kind of a fun. It was like, oh, this feels like Star Trek. This is kind of cool. Like they're not trying so hard to be new and run away from Star Trek that at least I knew what I was watching. So I'm still continuing to enjoy that aspect. I didn't laugh out loud at this episode. There wasn't anything that just made me bust out laughing. Last week had a couple of just literally burst out loud laughing moments. This one didn't have quite the same effect, but like I said, I still enjoyed it. I didn't hate myself for watching it, unlike Picard. I hated myself eventually for watching Picard. So there you go. That's my general impressions. Not as good as last week, I thought, but it still felt like Star Trek. So for me, that's a bit of a win. What were your general impressions, Eric?
Well, to sort of dovetail off of what you said, I didn't really have any laugh out loud moments, and that's a problem. That's a huge problem in a comedy when you don't have those laugh out loud moments where you don't really chuckle to yourself. I think I broke out in a smile a couple times, but I'll tell you, I think that our audience, the Rogues Gallery, provides me with a lot more amusement than this show does, because James was just talking about how you're covered in tie dye, and that's why you're hiding. And that does make
okay. Now I'm not covered.
Holding that in this entire time while you were talking, because that is a good joke, James, and I think that you would be a much better writer for this show than the writers that they actually have. Now, part of the problem is the style of the humor. So a lot of times the style of the humor, you're either you're into or you're not. This is a very slapstick kind of animated show, and to be honest, there are shows like that I actually really like. Where those fast-moving jokes, they really get me. A really good example of this is Family Guy. And actually, PJ, if you're still here, I think you even touched on this, where some people are starting to say, is this basically a complete ripoff of not only Orville, but of Seth MacFarlane? Is this like CBS All Access's answer to Seth MacFarlane, where they're basically not just going after the Orville, which I think there are clear parallels to the Orville, especially with the intro. The intro totally reminds me of Orville. And whether they're not just going after Orville, but Family Guy, because Family Guy does these kind of really quick jokes, very physical, really bizarre things. And it seems like Star Trek Lower Decks is kind of going for the same thing. One of the things that I've come to realize with this show and why I'm struggling with it is that this is an official Star Trek show, but it feels like a parody of Star Trek. It feels like a parody that's, done well in terms of, they know their stuff. At least they know the visuals, right? I think you touched on that, Dave, is the visuals are impressive, at least for me, in terms of, yeah, that looks like Star Trek. In fact, I watched the Ready Room last week, and they made a big deal about the LCARs, which I didn't even know what an LCAR was, which is kind of funny because I do consider myself a Trekkie. I actually own the technical manual for the Enterprise D. I actually got that as a teenager. I still have it. And I didn't know what an LCAR was. And an LCAR is, like, you can actually kind of see it in the background of the shot we have here. It's these display systems, right? Those are LCARs. So it's like a specific style that those things are made. And they wanted to make sure that they got them right and that, they put a lot of attention on them. And you can see that. I mean, this is animation. It's a visual medium. And visually, they do a lot of things that tell me, yes, this is Star Trek. But when it comes to the characters actually start to talk, or you see the situations they're in, or the way they react to them, to me, it feels like a Star Trek parody.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, because one of the things I mentioned last week is that one of the things I like about the show, I don't know if I give it, I mean, I could see what you're saying. I don't know if I'd say quite that. I can see the similarities to Family Guy, in terms of kind of like Seth MacFarlane's sort of brand of humor. I think some of that might just be because that's what's popular too, but I could see what you're saying as well. I could see it being intentional, or I could just see it being a byproduct of that's considered what, people want to see. So let's do more of that, that sort of.
And I'll take it a step further. I'll say that I don't necessarily think the showrunner is trying to do that, because I know the showrunner, he's from Rick and Morty. And I know enough about Rick and Morty to know they have a lot of that similar kind of humor, like really weird humor. It's not something I watch regularly, but I know well enough to know that they kind of have a, not necessarily similar style, but they have that sort of more of a, it's zany, it's weird, it's just a weird kind of universe. And so I can understand that, but I'll take it a step further and say I could see Kurtzman in his mind as being the person who's sort of the Star Trek czar right now, that's in charge of all Star Trek, being like, you know what? I'm going to greenlit this zany show as an FU to Seth. You know what I mean? That's something I could see. Not necessarily that the showrunner and the production team are trying to do that, because I do think that they have their own style in that regard as well, where they have the credentials to say, well, we're not really copying anybody. We were doing this on our own. But I could see Kurtzman greenlighting this as an FU or sort of a thing to Seth MacFarlane, saying, hey, we're gonna take you on directly, Yeah,
I mean, like I said, I can see that. I don't know. Well, I mean, I can see your opinion. I can see your point of view. Let's highlight a couple of comments actually going on over here on the Rogues Gallery. Donnie's got an interesting one. He says, I myself find Envoys more funnier than Second Contact. So stoked about a new episode coming up in 4.7 hours time. And then, like I said,
5 hours.
yeah. So, and just to be clear, like I said, I enjoyed this episode. I personally don't feel like it's as funny as the first episode. I really liked that first episode. And I think it's because the first episode, to me, at times the humor is a little bit more extreme. And I think I kind of like that. This still had kind of a couple of similar moments, which I can't get too further into those until we actually get into the spoiler discussion. Yeah, like I said, I didn't hate it. And I, like I said, I enjoyed it and I had fun with it primarily because at least it feels and looks and seems like Star Trek. But along those same lines, if we look at PJ's comments with Orbital Nation, PJ says, yeah, Kurtzman is trying to beat Seth at his own game of parody animation, thereby echoing actually what you're saying, Eric. And then he says, question, does it make sense to have a Star Trek parody of itself? Which, that's an interesting question. I think they're trying to answer that. Because I can see the argument and I can see what you're saying. as someone who does a Star Trek parody webcomic and Red Skirts, one of the things that we're always trying to do is that even though we're parroting Star Trek, we're always trying to bring in new and interesting elements. And one of the fun things that they could actually do on this show is they could actually call back to different things. So they don't have to necessarily worry with, quote unquote, doing as many new things. But I think that's part of the reason. I think it is kind of at times so self-referential within Star Trek that maybe it could come across that way as seeming more like a Star Trek parody. It makes me wonder how much of, I don't think it's necessarily intentional per se, but I think it's just they have so many callbacks to other Star Trek stuff. I think that's why it feels like a parody at times. It's like, oh, look at this.
Well, I think they like the visuals of Next Gen. That's what I feel a lot of, is like the showrunners, and this also goes back to the Ready Room and the first episode, which was, I can't remember their names, but it was the showrunner and the art director. So two of the main guys who are really in charge of the tone of the show. And it was very clear that they were big fans of Next Gen and, of classic Trek and things like that. But it's kind of funny when it comes to fans, it's like, well, what are you really a fan of? And there are people that they're a fan of the visuals. They like the visuals. They like the effects. They like the style. They like even in this picture, you can see like the hallway, the way the hallway is set up. Some people just like that aesthetic and they really enjoy it. And of course, it would make sense that animators, people primarily in animation, would really hone in on that. The thing with me is that's not what Trek is about. I like a lot of the visuals, but the visual style is not what makes me like Star Trek. What makes me like Star Trek is that optimistic view of the future. And that's not here, as far as I'm concerned, because the main character basically is always putting down Starfleet. She's better than Starfleet. And we can see in a lot of the characters, especially with the main bridge crew and the captain, actually the captain is a good example. They don't represent what to me Starfleet is supposed to represent. They're very I don't know what the word is. They're kind of mean. You can question their competency. Although I have noticed this. The security chief and the doctor seem to be competent at their job. In these first two episodes, we've seen that they actually know what they're doing. If you notice, because they're not the main stars. The main stars are the lower decks people. But if you see the couple of scenes with the doctor and the security chief, they know what they're doing. Every time you see them, they seem to know what they're doing. They're pretty good at their job. They do it well. Whereas the captain and the first officer kind of seem like idiots. You know what I mean? Especially the first officer seems kind of buffoonish, and then the captain seems like downright mean. And just sort of I guess we even talked about it last time that she could be kind of a glory hog. You know what I mean? So it is kind of interesting because you do have, I guess that I've already seen a little bit of that contrast where it does seem like, yeah, a lot of the officers seem really screwed up and flawed. And, I don't know. They don't seem like Starfleet officers. That's my point, But then again, you do see some of that the other side of it where they kind of do,
Yes, yeah, I can see what you're saying, and like I said, they're all valid comments. Speaking of comments, you see the private chat. So yeah.
Oh, I did. I don't think we have to worry about that. I think you can just ban them away. So
well, I did delete it, but it's still showing up. So now it's gone. It's like magic.
I just took care of that. So
there you go. Cool.
Hey, if we're getting spammed, we know we're doing something right.
Yeah, I guess so. The wrong kind of attention.
Let's bring Donnie into the conversation because Donnie seems to have a different perspective. And so he says, I respectfully hope that the rumors of Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, and Prodigy getting canceled are complete and utter nonsense. For I love every era of Star Trek. And by the way, Donnie, Prodigy's not on yet, so it couldn't be canceled. It would just not happen. But I definitely hear what you're saying, Donnie.
And
I know that. Did I lose you there?
Yeah, you dropped out for just a second. You kind of hung up. So I would go ahead and maybe just restate what you were saying.
Well, I was wanted to bring some comment or some attention to Donnie's comment because he's given us sort of a different perspective. And he says, I respectfully hope that the rumors of Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, and Prodigy getting canceled are complete and utter nonsense. It says, for I love every era of Star Trek. And I was just saying, as I understand it, you like Discovery. You're a Discovery fan.
Yeah. I was going to say that I'm kind of probably one of the people who's kind of on Donnie's side. I loved, really enjoyed season 2 of Discovery. All the stuff they did with Pike and the callbacks, to the cage, as well as, of course, the original series pilot and everything. Pike's actually become one of my favorite captains. He's not my favorite, but he's kind of up there now because I used to love the Star Trek Early Voyages comic that Marvel published in the 90s. I've been threatening that we should actually review those actually here on the show for retro reviews. So I enjoyed the second season of Discovery quite a bit. I'm looking forward to season 3. I hope it's going to be good. The thing I'm not a big fan of is Star Trek where they're not wearing comm badges, they're not in uniforms, and they're not on Starfleet ships, because that, to me, you change it so much. It's like, well, this could be, Firefly. This could be Farscape. This could be insert any, you know what I mean? Not to disparage those shows at all. I'm just saying when you remove too much of the trappings and the proscenium, whatever you want to call it, that makes it what it is, that visual style and those callbacks, then it doesn't really feel or look like Star Trek anymore. But I loved the second season Discovery so much because I just loved everything they did with Pike. It was a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to season 3. I hope it's going to be good. Strange New Worlds, I'm very, very excited for. And like I said, so far I'm enjoying Lower Decks. My only comment is just I didn't fight this episode was as funny as the last one. The last one had me bursting out loud laughing. I still enjoyed this one. And I still loved being in Star Trek because it felt like Star Trek. That's the thing that's cool. It felt like Star Trek. That like I said, the opening shot of the shot of the Cerritos, in orbit of the planet. That's a classic Trek shot. That was fun. I knew exactly where I was. And once we get into the spoilers, I can actually call out my favorite moment because I did have a scene in this that I really, really enjoyed, but I can't call it out just yet. So I and actually, Donnie, you're kind of skipping ahead. I was actually going to cover that in pop culture. That's one of the things I wanted to talk about. It's actually that story that I actually think is actually rumor. So we'll have to see. Do you think we're good to go ahead and maybe start talking about some spoilers? Or
we got some activity in the in the Rogues Gallery here. So
okay, so we can keep going for that.
Donnie was saying, Starfleet is about exploring new worlds, finding new life and civilizations, and of course, boldly going where no one has gone before. And he mentions that that is synonymous with what Star Trek is about as well. And I don't disagree with that. I totally think that that's a key part of it. But it's the optimism that keeps me coming back, and that's what the core of Star Trek is to me. And I feel a lot of new Trek, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in the current era of Star Trek is not. It is not optimistic. For instance, one of the biggest criticisms I had of Picard was the contemporary way in which people speak and act. And you see that in Starfleet Lower Decks as well. And I don't like it because I was thinking, and in fact, I'll even put it out there right now. I was thinking for our retro review next week, we should do Star Trek 4, because I would love to contrast Star Trek 4, which I think could actually be in a lot of ways interpreted as a comedy in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of humor in Star Trek 4, and how that humor works and how they put it in compared to the humor in Star Trek Lower Decks, and showing kind of how one way of doing it that I think would have been better, in my personal opinion, because the big thing about Star Trek 4 is it's the contrast. The thing that makes it funny is you have these people from the future who act differently, who think differently than people today, because they are from the future and they are enlightened, evolved humans. That was part of the, Gene's visions as well, is the idea that humans are evolving, humans are getting better. They're gonna, as the future goes on, we're going to get beyond a lot of our vices, a lot of our problems and things like that. We're not all just going to be raging alcoholics like everybody on Picard. And so that's one of the things that I think is core. And the reason that Star Trek IV worked as a comedy, in my personal opinion, is because of the contrast, because you had these people from the future dealing with us barbarians, and it made it funny. There's a whole thing about cursing, which, by the way, there's a lot of fans that have gravitated to that, where Kirk and Spock have a conversation about cursing, because Spock is really kind of taken aback by it, by all the cursing.
I think you mean the more colorful metaphors.
Yeah, the more colorful metaphors. Yeah, exactly. See, and of course, it's just it's definitely a contrast in the way that humor was done there and how it was approached versus how they do it in this. In this, they just try to make them act like, well, this isn't even the way people act today. I was in the Navy Reserve, and I can tell you, people don't act like this. Are there practical jokers and things like that? And are there immature people in the military? Yeah. I mean, it happens, but when it comes right down to it, especially when it comes down to the mission, they don't act like this. You know what I mean? They don't act like this. This is not the way that people act. And so it's not even, to me, it's not even a reflection on the way contemporary people are. It's like this just weird thing that's hard for me to understand, because in the context of Trek, it's like, how is this person even in Starfleet? Oh, I get it. Because she's a Mary Sue. That's why. Because she can do everything. There's nothing she can't do. But so that's why she's in Starfleet. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's just the writers protecting the character. It doesn't make the character believable, because you're like, first of all, you can't be good at everything. There's actually a contrast in this very episode where they even show that, which I thought was really weird. In a way, I'm just like, where are they trying to take me here? Because one message is saying, well, this girl can do everything. But then we have another character where we get to find out, no, he can't do everything. And, it's just that kind of thing, it's like, where are you trying to take me here? Because I'm really, really confused. And I don't know what the message is at the end of the story. I'm sitting there like, what was I supposed to get out of that exactly? Well, I was supposed to laugh, right? And I said I didn't. So there's a problem right there, right? But the ultimately, thematically, I'm asking myself, what was the point of that episode?
Right. And I can see
different directions.
Right. And I can totally see the criticism for sure. And let's go ahead and, as you said, let's go ahead and keep working our way through the comments over here in the Rogues Gallery. Orville Nation says, yeah, Eric, it looks like Star Trek, but the behavior of the characters is off. But then again, maybe we shouldn't take a cartoon that seriously. That's a good point. Some of my favorite stuff would be classified as cartoons. Batman the Animated Series. Batman the Animated Series is able to be funny at times and horrific at times and dramatic and scary, and it can do all those things. So I can see what you're saying, PJ, and it's a good comment. Maybe we shouldn't take a cartoon that seriously. But I could also see, kind of Eric's point of view too, from the standpoint of it feels like that they are maybe taking some shots at what they're doing with the Orville. So, maybe we should look at it with a different lens. Maybe we should give it a little bit more critical review, and maybe I don't know. You all are bringing up some interesting points. The one I was looking at, though, is that because Donnie says, because I had mentioned that, the comm badges and such on and so forth, I feel like are Star Trek. Donnie actually says, well, the comm badge was first introduced non-chronologically in the Next Gen pilot movie Encounter at Farpoint, which, yes, you are correct, sir. But I was just talking generally referentially into the idea of the Delta Shield, like the badges and like all of the trappings that kind of make it feel like Star Trek. The color coding for the different departments. It's just the various things that kind of set the scene to let you know that you're in a Star Trek show or Star Trek movie. I love those things, and when you're missing too many of them, it doesn't really feel like Star Trek. Like, for example, like one of the and we'll get into this. We'll get into this when we get into Star Trek 4, because Star Trek 4, they're not on board as a standard Federation starship, and they're not really quote unquote in uniform. So I'll kind of try to clarify a little bit better next week.
They are kind of in that episode.
Exactly.
Actually, every single way. So there's something to be said. I do think you can tell different stories. Like, I don't think you have to always be in Starfleet, for instance. I think you could actually show, you could have a Star Trek show where you showed how other people or even other races perceive Starfleet. I think that would be interesting. Like a lot of people, I think, have for years wanted a Klingon show where you actually have a Klingon ship going around and they're making first contact and killing everybody and doing crazy things like that, and just completely different. And that wouldn't be very Trek in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it would be interesting for the lore of Trek simply because people really like the Klingons. They're very popular. Not the Klingorks, by the way, the Klingons. And by the way, I did notice that. For those of you that think that, it's all one way or the other, this is quote unquote new Trek, and they are using the classic TNG Klingon design. They're not using the Klingon design, which I find that interesting as well.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. And then we can get, like I said, I want to get further into a lot of the nuance of the episode, but I want to wait until we get into the spoiler comments, the spoiler portion of the discussion. Donnie also agrees with me. He says, I am stoked about Strange New Worlds as well. I'm very, very excited for Strange New Worlds. That's part of the reason I'm hoping that rumor you mentioned earlier, Donnie, maybe isn't quite totally all true. James says, wait, what? Eric has a criticism of Picard?
Oh, you know me so well, James. You know me so well.
And then PJ with Orville Nation says, excellent point about Star Trek 4. Yes, the contrast, because Eric had mentioned earlier that he felt like that it was the contrast that really kind of helped us, keep it in the bounds of what we think of as traditional classic, or as some people would say, just Star Trek in general. You can see that they're
more than that. I'm saying it was the basis of the humor. That's what made it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be funny otherwise. If Kirk acted like the humans in Picard, there would be no humor in Star Trek. It would be completely different. The jokes wouldn't work. They wouldn't work.
Yeah, you lose sort of that fish out of water aspect of the story,
because they act like contemporary humans in Picard.
Right. Yeah. Totally. I totally agree with that. I was getting there. And then let's see. Oh, this is interesting. James said, and did you get spam because of the Monty Python topic tonight? I don't know, James. There's a good chance that maybe that's why. Maybe that's why.
See, the road makes me laugh more than Lower Decks. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the issue that I have.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, that's what you need in a comedy. You got to laugh.
Yeah, that's true. And like I said, I really enjoyed that first episode. I liked it a lot. I was excited and looking forward to the second episode, and I liked it. And kind of like Eric, I smiled a couple times, and I had fun with it. I enjoyed watching it. It wasn't like Picard. Picard got to the point where it felt like it was a chore. It was like, oh, I got to watch the next episode of Picard. And I did not look forward to it, and I did not enjoy it. But I looked forward to this, and I liked it. I just felt like the first episode was funnier. That's all. And then PJ with the Orville Nation, he's got a comment. He says, true, Dave, about Batman, because I talked about that sometimes you can take, obviously, a cartoon seriously. And I think that Batman the Animated Series definitely, in my mind anyway, proves that. Even though it's, very fantastical and it's got that sort of film noir kind of vibe, and it's so far removed, kind of from our world, but at the same point, it sucks you in. You feel like you're a part of that world, and when something's supposed to happen, it's supposed to have impact, and you're supposed to take seriously, it still works, even though it's highly stylized, and it bears very little resemblance to our world at all, at least of the world even back then, even of the world at that time. It bears very little resemblance at all. And then James has a comment about the roving Romulans. The roving Romulans. I'm not sure what that's referencing. Maybe it was something we said earlier, and I'm slightly out of sync.
I think maybe off of I was talking about having like a Klingon show. Maybe.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah, Romulans flying around. I'll be honest with you. After watching Picard, I feel like I'm good with the whole Romulan thing for a little while. Like it's so weird because one of my favorite original series episodes is Balance of Terror.
Classic.
And I love Mark Leonard as the Romulan commander, and they talk about their society, and I love the design work of the ship and their uniforms and their disruptor pistols, and even when they revisit the Romulans later, and they do the episode where Kirk has to go in disguise as the Romulan and steal the cloaking device, and there's like all these really fun episodes and all the stuff they did with them in TNG.
By the way, with a female Romulan commander,
yeah,
which was a big deal at the time,
Yeah, I've always just loved everything about the Romulans, but between Nemesis, the Remans, and Picard, I'm just I think I'm pretty done with Romulans for a little while. So that's just me. I think I'm done with Romulans for a little while.
DJ's having a good laugh over that. He thinks you're a funny guy, Dave.
I'm just being honest. I'd be down to following some Klingons around. I don't know if I want. I tell you what, you want to know the group of people, the alien races I would enjoy to follow around the universe the most would be the Andorians. I would love a show because I love Shran from Enterprise, and I think and again, we're not in a spoiler part, so I can't get into it yet. But I did have a favorite part. And I find myself constantly being drawn in with the Andorians. I love the Andorians. I think that, to me, that would be the fun thing to explore more, because that was some of my favorite stuff I enjoyed about Enterprise was all the stuff with the Andorians. It was just so much fun getting to learn more about them. So
yeah, I think because we've talked about it. I'm kind of critical of Enterprise. It's not my least favorite Trek show, though. I want to make that clear, and I don't hate it. I don't hate Enterprise, but I think Enterprise started a lot of the problems we have now with all these prequels, because there is intrinsically some problems with constantly going backwards, because what ends up happening is you start rewriting history of the show. That's what happens. It's happening on Discovery. It's going to happen on Strange New Worlds. It happened on Enterprise. I'll give you a great example, because we're talking about Balance of Terror. And Balance of Terror, they established that during the Romulan Earth War, because there was no Federation, it was Earth versus Romulus, they used nuclear weapons. But then in Enterprise, we've got phasers and we've got photon torpedoes. What happened to the era of the nuclear weapons, which is supposed to happen later, because the Romulan War takes place after the events of Enterprise. So that's just one example where you have problems sometimes where you go back, you revise things, and then it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit anymore with what we knew from before. But regarding what I really like about Enterprise is I always say it made the Andorians cool. It really did. Shran was awesome. And it totally fleshed out the Andorians in a way that was never done before, which is kind of weird, because when you think about it, the Andorians, in terms of Trek lore, are one of the founding races of the Federation. So it's like, why don't we know more about them? Why don't we see them more? But Enterprise actually tried to fix that.
And if you go over and you check out Red Skirts over at redskirtsonline.com, that's actually the Star Trek parody comic I do with Al Sparrow, one of our main characters, who's the commanding officer of the security division, Kamari. Kamari is obviously influenced by Andorians, because Al and I love the Andorians so much because of Enterprise. We just absolutely fell in love with the Andorian sort of, people and race, and we really wanted to do something fun with them. But at the same point, you have to keep them unique, which is why when you look at her antenna, they actually are a callback to the tick. So that, and then her civilization is actually insect based. And as we get into episode 2, actually, of Red Skirt, you'll learn more about that. But Kamari is there because we love the Andorians so much, and Shran was just amazing. Every episode with Shran. I loved every episode with Shran. He was such a great character and so much fun to watch, and honorable too. That was the thing that was neat about Shran. He comes across the same way as the Andorians did in original series, but he's just, it's just a different society, and he's such an honor-bound dude, at times. It's interesting. There's a
lot of love for Shran in the Rogues Gallery. PJ says Shran rocks, and Jane says, I have an Andorian bobblehead. So.
There you go. And then we do have an interesting comment, actually, from Man of Sand. Man of Sand says, would you guys say that Lower Decks feels influenced by other cartoon shows out there? Well, I think that we've touched on that some, Man of Sand, because obviously, Family Guy has been pulled out as an example. Obviously, there's a Rick and Morty comparison, obviously, since one of the gentlemen that's working on this worked on Rick and Morty. I'd say it's definitely influenced. And there's again, we're not in the spoiler part. I do think it's more of a callback than necessarily an influence, I think. But yeah, I would say definitely, I feel like it's definitely influenced by more of the animated shows of today. But it doesn't feel like it's very influenced by, well, I'll just say right now, there's obviously no influence to some of my favorite animated shows, at least not yet anyway. Like, I'm not saying anything that feels like it's a callback to Transformers, or G.I. Joe, or any of those great shows I grew up with. I don't see a lot of influence even from anime at all either. And a lot of times in animated shows, there's usually a heavy anime influence, and I don't see any anime influence in this actually at all. But there's definitely the more contemporary. I would agree with that. Would you agree with that, Eric?
I compare it to Family Guy all over the place. I used to watch a lot of Family Guy. I haven't recently, but I used to watch quite a bit of it, and I would compare it to that in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat, I would compare it to Family Guy.
And then I mentioned last episode that this episode, not so much, but the last episode, it kind of reminded me of Regular Show. If there's any Regular Show fans out there in the audience, I love Regular Show. My brother's a huge fan of Regular Show. And I actually started re-watching Regular Show because of it had the first episode, not this one, but the first episode had a vibe that reminded me of Regular Show a lot. Eric, have you ever seen any Regular Show?
I don't think so. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but I'm not sure if I've even ever seen like a whole episode.
Do you have a subscription to Hulu still?
I do.
You should totally check out Regular Show. Regular Show is fun. I think you would enjoy it. There's a lot of musical callbacks in Regular Show. I really think you would enjoy Regular Show if you gave it a shot. It's kind of wacky and weird, like Rick and Morty. But it's a lot of fun. So I would definitely say check out Regular Show. You would laugh at Regular Show.
All right.
I really think you would laugh at Regular Show.
Take that challenge there. Can you make Eric laugh challenge?
I'll tell you, I think you'll like it. It's a little weird. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like, why is this bird hanging out with this little mammal, and why does this guy have a bubblegum dispenser for a head? And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense, but if you give it a shot, I think you'll like Regular Show.
Yeah, I'm just realizing I think I actually have watched an episode or two with my daughters, because that sounds familiar, what you just said. So
yeah,
I have watched an episode or two with my daughters. So
yeah. So yeah, that would be my comment, Mancy. And I think it's one of the more contemporary stuff. Then there's And then Orville Nation says he agrees with Man of Sand. Yeah, it does feel influenced. So PJ agrees. And then my mom says that she had watched some regular show with my brother. My brother was the one who introduced me to regular show. And I'm a huge fan now of Rick and was it Mordecai and darn it, I want to say Rick, but I don't think his name is Rick. I think I'm confusing it. I'm confusing all this. I wish my brother was here so he could clarify it for me. Darn it, I know that's not right. I can't remember. Anyhow, moving on. So are we good to get into the spoiler part now? Because there's some things I want to...
James wasn't talking about us because he says, Picard, we are bored. Oops, Borg. Hope we're talking about us, James. Yeah, let's get into spoilers.
Okay, good. Because now I can actually talk about the things I want to talk about. Cool. Okay, so now we're going to get into our spoiler-filled part or discussion of Star Trek episodes Lower Decks. So let me just start off. I'll throw out my favorite scene. My favorite scene was actually the bar fight with the Andorians. I think I've kind of set that up. I had a lot of fun with that. I didn't laugh out loud at it, but I did smile quite a bit because I thought it was very entertaining. And I love the callback to the alien from Star Trek the Animated Series. I thought that was hilarious, that he was a shape changer and he'd stolen the bunch.
That was quick. That went by
Yeah,
really
it was quick.
Yeah.
But I caught it. I thought that was awesome. I really enjoyed that. The Klingon stuff, not so much. I mean, it was pretty obvious. What was kind of what they were kind of doing, yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was weird. I thought it was weird that the Klingon stole the shuttlecraft, like when he was drunk, and I don't know. That was one of the things about the episode I didn't care for, that didn't make any sense. I wouldn't have said that our not our lead character, but our second lead. I wouldn't have necessarily called her out as a Mary Sue, even though they tried to kind of say she was the Mary Sue in the first episode. But with this one, where it was like she already knew the Klingon commander guy, and they had a history, and she could speak Klingon and do all this other stuff, and it was just like, well, how old is she? Because like at times she comes across like she's just maybe a couple years
the same age.
Yeah, but she comes across.
They're the same age.
Right.
He said that in the episode. He said they're the same age.
Right. But the point I'm making is that she comes across, the way she acts at times, like, I don't know, she's like a year out of the academy. But then when she starts talking about her experiences, she sounds like she's lived a lifetime. Like she's, already been a captain and gotten busted down or something. It does. There's some things about her character I don't quite understand. And that was one of the things I didn't get, like, how is it all of this stuff? It didn't quite make sense to me. I love that opening shot of the Ceratops where it was orbiting the planet. I thought that was cool. That felt really a lot like classic Trek. And I enjoyed a lot of stuff with the engineer character, the cyborg guy, where he's gonna switch jobs. I liked a lot of that stuff where we saw him in the different divisions, where he was in the medical, trying to be, kind of like a nurse, and then we saw him trying to do command, and they didn't really call it out as a Kobayashi Maru scenario, but they kept giving him the no-win scenario. I thought that was fun and funny. There was, like I said, there's a lot of stuff about this episode I liked, but my favorite thing would be the Andorian bar fight. I really, really liked that. And my second favorite thing would be the stuff they did with the engineer guy, where it's like he's trying to like spend time and impress the girl, and he's like putting himself through all this stuff trying to impress her. Because I think most of us have tried to win someone over. I think we've all done things we really didn't want to do, and then eventually you're looking at yourself in the mirror, going, what have I become? How did I get here? So I think a lot of us have all been there at one point or another, trying to win someone over. Did you have a favorite part, Eric? What was your favorite part of this episode?
I had some fun with the engineer character, as far as what he was doing, because he was trying to do all these different things, kind of tried to figure out what else he might be good at. And what I liked about it was there were things he wasn't any good at. There were things that he sucked at. And then there were things he was actually arguably with security, he might have actually been a better fit for security than even engineering, because it was showing that he actually had a real talent for that, thanks to his implant, actually. So he actually was really good at that. But what I also liked about that was, if you notice, they showed the senior officers in a good light. They actually did a funny joke where the head of engineering, looks like he's about to tear him a new one because he wants to leave engineering. Like, that starts to get all ominous and all that kind of stuff. And then it turns out the guy's like, "Oh, you're a great worker. You'll be good at whatever you do. Good luck." And then the same thing happens with the security chief, because the security chief is like, "Oh my God, you're like the best security officer I've ever had. I'm so looking forward to working with you." But he says, "I'm going to go back to engineering." And again, they have that sort of thing where like he's going to rip him a new one. And then the head of security is like, "That's fine. If that's where you think you need to be, do that." So that's what I liked about that, because this show in some ways is schizophrenic. And that's what I was trying to say before, is like, on the one hand, they'll show some of these officers being like incompetent, mean, just jerks, and not necessarily even seem to know what they're doing. But then you'll have the contrast where you'll see somebody else do something really nice, and they seem like they're really professional. And that's kind of the Starfleet that I know, that I grew up on as a kid. The officers are confident, especially the senior officers. They're mentors. They're good people. They're heroic. They're all these, great things. And then, on the other side, you have like the captain and the first officer, who come across much more negatively, in my opinion. One of the issues I did have with that sequence, because I was having some fun with it, with the engineer as he was trying all these different jobs. The command part I thought was really dumb, because it was like, I get it. That's kind of like goes back to what PJ was saying, was like, well, am I being too hard on this because it is a cartoon and it's a comedy and maybe I should just let this go? But the scenarios were just dumb. It was just like there was no thought put into them. It wasn't the Kobayashi Maru. One of the scenarios he screwed up was he couldn't give the order to turn the ship so it wouldn't collide with an asteroid, because he was so indecisive, which is like, well, how did he get in Starfleet then? That's the kind of stuff. Me as a Trekkie, I start thinking about stuff like that, and then I lose the humor, because I'm like, how is this guy in Starfleet if he doesn't know even the basics about this kind of stuff? Because he went to Starfleet Academy, right? So don't they teach him all the basics so he can do these other jobs if he has to? Geordi started out as the helmsman on Star Trek, right? They do different jobs. They move around. That's part of the deal with Starfleet. Balance of Terror, great example. In Balance of Terror, a lot of people don't even notice this, but in the middle of the battle, the navigator goes down and Uhura takes his station in the middle of the battle, because they're cross-trained. That's the idea, right? So stuff like that, that's my Starfleet. And then when I see something like that, I'm like, I don't get it. And then it takes me out of the humor. Then I can't be relaxed. And I'm just, because I'm sitting there questioning, how did he get through the academy?
That's an interesting point to make. I think it'd been easier to take that kind of stuff too. Like if he had been more of an enlisted, engineer, like O'Brien, because O'Brien was like some kind of like a technical sergeant kind of a character, I think, because he was enlisted. Yeah.
Like me.
Yeah.
He was, but I was never a chief though. But he was supposed to be a non-commissioned officer, which that evolved, by the way, because if you remember when they first made him a character, because in the first season he wasn't a character, he was just filling in different roles, as an extra kind of, and I've heard Cole Meany talking about this. His name in the first season was ND, meaning nondescript, so he had no name. Then in the second season they made him into a major character, but he has lieutenant pips on, a lot of people have noticed that. It's like, well, why does he have lieutenant pips if he's supposed to be a non-commissioned officer? It wasn't until I think like the third season of DS9, they finally gave him like a specific new rank insignia to show that he was indeed a chief. And then they made a big deal that he was a non-commissioned officer, So it's kind of, it's one of those things that kind of evolved over time. I would like to know that story, by the way, because even as much as I'm into this and I've heard Cole Meany talk about it, I've never heard like who decided that and said, hey, we want to show non-commissioned people in Starfleet, like because it evolved. It evolved over time. And the first time you see Cole Meany is in Encounter at Farpoint, and he's the helmsman for the battle bridge.
Yeah, it's interesting how they kind of did that, because I caught all that, and then they, of course, then well, yeah, I'll just say I agree. I agree with what you're saying, Eric. Because I wonder too, like who it was who made that decision, because they did call him chief, and
right.
I think at one point, even on Next Gen, I think the insinuation was that he was the transporter chief, and then that obviously continued to evolve. But that's interesting. Because I've heard different people talk about it, but I've never heard anyone talk about the decision why to make him non-commissioned, to basically, him basically portray an enlisted man, right. Or a working man, as they say. Don't call me sir, I work for a living,
Right.
So no, it's interesting. It's very interesting. I don't think I've heard too many people talk too much about why. Yeah, cool. We do have some comments over here in the Rogues Gallery. PJ with Orville Nation says, yeah, she is Mary Sue-ish. Yeah, unless we find out she is a different race that lives longer. It's a good point. It's a good point, PJ. I hadn't considered that. I hadn't thought about the idea that she might be just a different race, and maybe she has lived the equivalent of a lifetime. I just got the vibe.
They said she's the same age as the other character. He said that. He said they're the same age.
Right. But it could be some kind of weird thing where it's 1 year equals 4 years, blah, blah. There might be an explanation. We'll see. I'm just saying. And then PJ says, that's a really good point, Eric. So PJ's agreeing with you. Not exactly sure what he was agreeing with at this point, but
he was talking about because he said, yep, it takes you out of the story. And I think that was my rant about how I was enjoying the engineer's story arc.
Yeah.
But then I got taken out of it with the command thing, because I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. A Starfleet officer wouldn't be like that. A Starfleet officer has to know the different jobs.
And again, I honestly just took some of that as because it is a comedy. This goes back to PJ's comment about, should we take it too seriously? I honestly did blow some of that stuff off and just kind of assumed, rightly or wrongly, that it was just, intended to be just something silly for the show, But
then that goes back to what I said. Then it's a parody of a Trek show. It's not a Trek show.
Right. Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah. That's well, I think I've talked about the thing I like the most. I like the Andorian bar fight. I like to call back to the Star Trek animated series Alien. I thought that was fun. That whole sequence I had a lot of fun with. I really enjoyed the stuff with the cyborg guy who him trying to switch jobs, so he could spend more time with the Orion character. And I kind of like her too. I thought she's kind of fun. But yeah, some of the stuff with the Klingon, I didn't understand why he stole the shuttlecraft. I didn't really like her whole thing where like the Ferengi, because I thought that was kind of fun. And then when it turned out, she knew the Ferengi and he owed her a favor, I didn't find that particularly funny. And I felt like it kind of, in a weird way, it both cheapened the Ferengi character, but at the same point made the Ferengi character seem a little bit more legit all at the same time. Because it was a more evolved, nuanced approach to a Ferengi. But I kind of like when he was kind of more the season 1 Ferengi, because they were very, as much as I love the Ferengi in Deep Space Nine, because it's so much wonderful stuff with them over in Deep Space Nine, I did kind of enjoy at first the whole, sort of season one, approach, to how he was acting and the way, sort of he was, and then when they did the big reveal and it's like, oh, he's got a monocle and he's very sophisticated and he just knows her. And I'm just like, so the Klingon knows her. He knows her. It's like, does everyone know her except for the lead character who we're following?
She's the key to everything, Dave. She's the key to everything. We've heard it a billion times, and that's the case here. She's the key to everything. And I had a real problem with that sequence because I saw it coming a mile away. I'm sure most people did. It's like there's no way she wouldn't know what a Ferengi is. They're not going to do that to that character. This character can do no wrong. So I saw that coming a mile away, and I'm like, that's poor writing, especially in a comedy. Comedy is based on being surprised. I remember that actually from an old Dick Van Dyke episode where Dick Van Dyke is trying to explain comedy and what makes things funny. And he says a big thing is because it's unexpected. When something is unexpected and abnormal, it makes you laugh. And even sometimes it can be a tragic thing, but it's because it kind of takes you aback, you laugh. And when you see this whole setup a mile away, it just makes the entire sequence for me it's not funny, because I could see where they were going with this. I knew they weren't going to make her mess up. I knew there's no way this character doesn't know what a Ferengi is. Plus, she's never wrong. So I knew it was going to happen. And then, on top of it, they had this little thing where she was basically saying like, well, you're not going to tell anybody, right? Because you're not going to make me look like an idiot. And the next thing you know, he's out there telling everybody and making her look like an idiot. So now I don't like either character. Now I'm like, you both suck. It's like that's not cool. So I had a real problem with that whole sequence and where it went and all that stuff. To me, it's just not funny.
I can totally see that. And I did think it was weird too that as well traveled as she is in the universe, the fact that she seemed to be struggling with the idea that this is a Ferengi when he's doing all the classic, hallmark things that Ferengis did, especially the season one Ferengis, the Stargazer incident Ferengis, yeah, I don't know. That's one of the, like I said, one of the parts of the episode I disliked the most. Because I just didn't enjoy a lot of aspects about what they were doing with her character and this idea, the whole Mary Sue thing. I don't have a lot of problems with that as long as you earn it in the right way. But I don't know.
There's nothing.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, that's pretty much going to be it for me. Do you have anything else you want to call out for the second episode of Star Trek Lower Decks Envoy?
Where are we now? This is week 10, right? We're done. We're not watching.
Wow.
No, we got 8 more episodes. All right.
Yeah, so say this is week 2.
Like it's gonna be a long 8 weeks.
Oh man. Well, maybe they've got some amazing episodes they're sitting on, and maybe they'll win you over in the end.
Amanda Sand, you hit it right on the head. By the way, Amanda Sand, good to see you because I don't think you were here last week, and we do appreciate your comments. He said, at this point, she's starting to remind me a bit of the Raffi character from Picard. Yep. I wasn't going to say it, but Amanda Sand, you said it, so I'm going to back you up on that. I agree with you, and everybody knows anybody who's watched the show knows I hate Raffi. I cannot stand Raffi. And I have a very good reason for not liking Raffi, which is that I feel that she totally made fun of addiction and made it a big joke. And I don't appreciate that. I think it's sick. I think it's sick. And by the way, she does that too. She's always drinking on duty and stuff like that. It's like, come on, But yeah, you said it, Manasan, so I didn't have to. She is starting to remind me of Raffi.
Well, and it's interesting too. I find it interesting that everyone keeps talking about how much you hate Picard, Eric, and no one seems to remember that I literally have stopped watching Next Generation because Picard has tainted Next Gen.
I think it's because you say it.
Put that out there.
You have a much more sophisticated way of expressing your disgust than I do, and I think people don't pick up on it. It's like more subtle, you know.
So you're saying my eloquence,
right,
masks the fact that I keep telling people that I hated Picard. So yeah, okay, all right, I guess I'll take it.
And by the way, you know, it's funny. I had somebody I was talking to a lot on. I talked to a lot on Twitter. One of the All Star Trek folks, and he was saying that he wasn't going to watch TNG anymore. And I remember saying to him, "Come on, you know, you can't be like that. Don't let some new show destroy what was great about the old show." And I have to admit, a lot of times when I try to watch TNG, I can't get through it anymore. I have to admit it. You know, I was like, "Hey, man, don't be like that." And now it's like, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna switch over to Stargate and watch that instead, because Stargate and TNG are on at the same time. One's on Comet, one's on Heroes and Icons. I have both of those channels over the air. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna switch to Comet and watch some Stargate.
Well, there you go. That says it all right there. I mean, I can't. We've watched a couple episodes of Next Gen for the show based on the topic that was, you know, that week. But other than that, I can't. I find myself questioning too much every single decision that Picard is making. Because now all of a sudden I feel like that I feel like Picard's decision making that's happening in the show is motivated by something other than what they want us to believe. So I'm constantly like looking at Picard going, what's your angle? You know, this is not what you want to have happen. What are you going to have happen? Like, so I've just found that Picard has damaged how I view Next Gen. I can't, and it's not even him. It's also Data too. It's just the two of them. There's just something about it that doesn't quite work for me anymore after having actually watched Picard, which is so weird because I love Data. Data is such a great character, but I just what they did with him in the show and everything. I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I feel it. Like I said, I would say, you know, the intellectual part of my mind says that shouldn't be, but I felt it. I actually felt it watching. So it is what it is.
I sense a disturbance in the force.
Yeah, very much.
Like a million souls cried out and then were suddenly silenced.
More like a million fans were suddenly silenced or more.
Yeah. There you go. There's season 1 of Picard review right there. Very cool. All right. Are we good to move on maybe to pop culture or something? I don't see any more.
Let's do it.
All right. Let me
the good pop culture news out there.
All right. Let me get the banner up here real quick, and then we can switch over.
Hey, Bobby's in the house. Bobby, it's good to see you. It's always a pleasure to have you over in the Rogues Gallery making a comment. And he said he just got home from work, and he's guessing episode 2 wasn't what you hoped, Eric. I'm not sure if I can say hopes. That's one of the things that's also kind of tough for me is my expectations are really low at this point. So it doesn't take a whole lot for me to be like, oh, well, that was cool. At least I don't think. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too critical. I don't know. But my expectations are way low. So they don't have to hit a super high bar to get me to say, oh, well, that was better than I thought. So far, that's not happening, Bobby. So far, that's just not happening.
Yeah, and I enjoyed the second episode, Bobby. I didn't love it, but I did enjoy it. I liked the first episode better, I think. Of course, I laughed out loud multiple times at the first one. And this last one, I was kind of smiling and having fun with it, and I just enjoyed being in the world of Trek because at least Lower Decks, at the very least, if nothing else, at least it looks and feels like a Trek show, which is fun. So I enjoyed it from that aspect as well. So, yeah. All right, so if we're good, let's go ahead and segue over into Pop Culture Wars. I've got the banner up if you wouldn't mind sharing it. Okay, so here we are, Pop Culture News. In this segment of the show, we talk about anything interesting happening in the world of pop culture that we think you, our dear valued viewer, our dear valued listener, should be either aware of. Maybe it's something that we think that you would enjoy talking about. Usually it's definitely something that piques either mine or Eric's interest, and we bring it to you in this segment that we call, where did that come? Call Pop Culture News. So tell me, Erica, what do you have up first for this week's installment of Pop Culture News?
Well, let's start out with some of this DC stuff and Warner Brothers because the stuff gets pretty crazy. So there's a lot going on for folks that don't know. I guess if you're living under a rock or just don't like DC and don't like Time Warner and that kind of stuff, which I'm sure there are people out there that don't. There's a lot going on at Warner Media right now, which of course is owned by AT&T. And there's been quite a bit of shakeups going on. At first, it started with Warner Brothers, that section, and then it went down to DC. And now there's all sorts of layoffs that have happened at DC, and the future of the company is all up in the air. So the Hollywood Reporter went out and decided to interview Jim Lee, because Jim Lee apparently is one of the people that was not taken out in these layoffs. The headline reads, DC's Jim Lee on the company's future. Quote, "We are still in the business of publishing comics," unquote. Now, this is an article from August 14th. This is a really good article, by the way. I recommend that if you have any interest in the future of DC, particular with the comics and all that kind of stuff, this is something to check out. Dave and I actually did talk about this quite a bit off the air as this story was developing. And I think both of us kind of feel like there's a lot of spin and a lot of damage control that's going on. It's really interesting. One of the big things I got out of this is that basically, because Dave, you've talked about this before. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you've talked about how Lee has made some questionable business decisions throughout his career. Let's just put it that way, from just strictly from a business standpoint. And what's that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say. Yeah, I personally feel like that. Again, that's just my own personal opinion. I mean, if you look at, some of what he's done, I mean, he's for a generation of comic book fans, he's probably their Jack Kirby. I think that's a pretty fair thing to say, because he does represent sort of the comic book movement in terms of art for an entire generation of fans. When you look at the work that he was doing on Punisher Warzone, that obviously carries over into the fantastic work he did at X-Men, of course, being a co-founder at Image, and all the work that he did with Wildcats and all the amazing titles that kind of were shepherded kind of under his sort of stewardship and so he's an incredibly talented creative professional, and he does, it's not like he always makes bad decisions, but in terms of like being an executive at times, when you look at his kind of history with running these comic book publishing companies, there might be some stuff there. I'm not sure he's the person to leave in charge. I'll just put it there. So.
Well, one of the things that they talked about in this article is what is his position, and there's been a lot of speculation about that. And one of the things that they talk about in this article that he mentions is, does he still have the title of publisher? The answer is yes. So he is still the publisher, because we had talked about that off the air that he wasn't, and he's saying he is. At least he still has the title. But they asked the question, does your job change? And he basically says that they have always kind of had this idea that they were going to bring in somebody with more of a managerial business role to basically run the company with him, if you will. So that's kind of what he's saying, is that was kind of always the plan, which to me makes sense in the context of what you and I have talked about, that there are probably people above him that know his history and would have some concerns about his business expertise, and pairing him with somebody who might be better at that than him.
Yeah, and again, it's like I said, it's not that he's always, he has that he's always made necessarily, bad decisions or questionable decisions or anything. I'm not saying, I mean, as a creative professional, I mean, he is one of the best. And when you look at the titles, that whether you would look at his, with what he did with Wildstorm, there's some amazing characters. There's some great stuff there that still exists. And part of it exists is because, the guy's smart, and creatively, I mean, he's, like I said, for a generation of fans, I would say he probably is to them what Jack Kirby is, to a whole nother generation. I mean, just as a creative professional, I mean, he's, borderline, genius at times. But it's just on the business side, I don't know. It kind of requires a different hat, Like for myself, like I can tell you right now, I don't make the world's best business decisions. I'm a creative guy, It's sometimes better to have someone holding on to the reins that, for lack of a better term, is more of a quote unquote bean counter. So someone who's going to pay more attention to the numbers.
It's not just about being a bean counter either. It's also about being a marketer, and a promoter. I think of Stan Lee and what a great marketer and promoter he always was. And that's why he was the publisher at Marvel Comics for so long. He was like the voice of Marvel Comics. I mean, he absolutely was the voice, and he was the face in a lot of ways of Marvel Comics. Anytime somebody was on TV talking about Marvel Comics, it was usually Stan Lee. Anytime they did something, so it's not just a matter of that. There's a lot that goes into it when you're basically responsible for the direction, helping with the direction of a company, managing a company beyond just being a bean counter.
Well, and I didn't mean it like that. I'm just saying someone who is able to view it from a different perspective. Someone who's more looking at results, someone who's more looking at numbers, someone who's more, even from a marketing standpoint, just it's just a different mindset, than just being creative, So that's kind of my thing. And just to be clear, Jim was my boss at one time over at DC. Like I wasn't really introduced to him, but I did kind of meet him once. But I don't really know him very well at all. It's just been sort of passing meetings or whatever. Seemed like a nice guy, But when you look at what happened to Homage, what happened to Wildstorm, what's happening at DC right now, and he was in a major leadership position, maybe there's a little bit of a track record you can see. That's all I'm saying. And again, that's just my own personal opinion. It doesn't reflect those of Retro Rogues or anyone associated with the show. Obviously, it's just my own personal opinion, and I don't mean it to sound mean, but I'm just saying, that I think we all know one of the reasons that Jim is being kept at DC is because he is a creative genius, and he is one. Like I said, for an entire generation of fans, he is their Jack Kirby. That's why he's still there in that position, is because the guy's amazingly talented, and he's smart, so why wouldn't you have him in that position? But as publisher, I don't know, and obviously he's been kind of moved out of that position into a different one. And maybe that's what's best. It's so funny because before Jim came over to DC, I really felt like the face of DC as much as they wanted it to be Dan DiDio. I felt like the face of DC was much more Jeff Johns. Jeff was the one who seemed to be kind of like the face, of DC Comics, And it's interesting too because, DC Comics, and I think of them artistically, but I think of them as being more story driven and being more of a writer's side thing. So it makes sense that, for example, Jeff would be the face, because he's a writer, right? So I don't know. There's been turmoil and disarray at DC for quite some time, but this AT&T shakeup just takes it to like a whole another level.
Yeah, there's a direct question in this article, and I'm going to read Jim Lee's answer. So they said, what about the rumor that AT&T hates comics and wants to get out of the comic business? His answer is, I don't think they want to stop us from publishing comics. I don't think. That's a problem there. Comics serve a lot of different purposes, and one of them is it's a great way to incubate ideas and creating the next great franchises. We want to continue that. Why would you want to stop that? Why would you want to stop creating great content that could be used across the greater enterprise? What I get out of this, I was telling Dave, I read between the lines a lot. I don't think Jim Lee's met with anybody from AT&T. I don't think he has the juice.
Yeah, I could probably see that,
and that's a problem.
Yeah,
because those are the guys who are really calling the shots. So, if he can't get an appointment with the CEO of AT&T and actually get like a straight answer one way or the other, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. He can't do his job if he can't do that.
Yeah,
he can't do his job if he can't do that. That's like, this is a great example. That's like Feige not being able to talk to Iger. If Feige cannot go and talk to Iger, he's powerless. He's a nobody. He's a nothing. You know?
And it could be one of those things too that the executives at AT&T may have just decided we're going to do what we're going to do, and we don't need to meet with anybody. Irregardless of who they are, irregardless of how many books they've sold for us or whatever, we don't care. We're going to do what we're going to do. And we're going to do what we think's in the best interest, of, the company that we bought. We think the best way to handle it is by doing this. So I don't know. I feel like a lot of this where Jim's been running around, doing interviews and stuff, because I've seen these interviews with him constantly coming up talking about, DC has a plan. DC has a plan. DC has a plan. It feels a little bit like spin control, putting the finger in, the hole in the dike to keep the, hopefully keep the dike from breaking. You know what I mean? Like it just feels like that they're trying, like he's just doing damage control, and trying to be like, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. It's all good. It's all good. We're going to take DC Direct, and we're going to get with these partners that we've been working with, and you'll see. Everything's just going to be fine. When clearly all the other news stories are telling us everything is not fine. And it's weird because in the Untold History of Marvel Comics, which is a very interesting read, I have been over the time since it came out, I mostly consume it as actually an Audible book. I actually listen to it on Audible. And one of the things they talk about in that, there was this period in time right before Superman the movie came out where DC imploded. And it looked like they were in a bad way. And there were these rumors circulating that Marvel might actually buy DC. And that, DC didn't want to be in the business of publishing comics necessarily anymore. And that there was the possibility of they were literally going to take some of their most popular titles and basically license them, or maybe even potentially just sell them off to Marvel. And when I hear those stories, I go, really? That was that bad? Like right before Superman the movie came out? Like, I don't know about that. But then when you sit back and you look at everything that's going on now, and then you look at everything that's happening there, and you're reading these spin control articles, whatever, and I'm like going, I guess I wouldn't be shocked. would be shocked if, someone was able to purchase assets from DC, like part of their publishing catalog, for example, or another company like IDW or whoever, Boom, doesn't matter who it is, Aspen, suddenly started publishing DC titles through a licensing agreement. I wouldn't be shocked at that now. I was a little shocked when all of a sudden another company was going to publish Spider-Man stories, new original Spider-Man stories. That didn't make any sense, but it went over just fine, so I don't know. We'll see. But I just I feel like a lot of this is just spin control, trying to say, hey, you know what, everything's fine. Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain. Everything's fine.
No, I get that too. But like I said, I think this is a good read because it's all about reading between the lines. And they asked that question directly in this interview. They asked him directly whether Marvel is going to be taking over DC, or at least Time Warner's. What is it now? Warner Brothers Media. I keep forgetting the actual name. So it's Warner Brothers Media, whether they're going to take over publishing comics for them. And he said no. But again, I wonder with that other part of the article that I put out, whether he really knows, whether he really has that access, whether he knows what the plan is. I'm sure there's a plan. I just don't know if Jim Lee knows what it is. And that's what I really question reading this. And it's funny because we've speculated a lot about Marvel because see, Disney has a history. And I want to put this in context why I bring this up a lot. Disney has a history, and I use Scrooge McDuck as the example because the Scrooge McDuck comics are legendary to some people. There's a huge following for those Scrooge McDuck comics that have been around forever. Okay, Disney didn't publish them. Disney had another company do that. They licensed it. Disney has never really been into the comics business. They've never really wanted to do that. It seems like a no-brainer, like something they totally could do. They've just never wanted to do that. That goes all the way back to Walt. He just has never had an interest in doing comics. Just never has. So that's kind of like institutionalized in the company. So it makes you wonder, would they prefer to license Marvel Comics to somebody else, to have somebody else publish them and just get out of that, the way they did with Scrooge McDuck? That's why I bring that up all the time. But now we're starting to hear it more from DC and from Warner Media. So that's a big question to me now. Is that a possibility? This article, Jim says no, that's not going to happen. But again, I question whether he's talking to the people that are making these decisions ultimately, because it's not going to be him. Sorry to say, but it's not going to be him that makes that decision.
Right. Well, time will tell. We'll see how things shake out, and we'll see where everything is. I think whatever happens with the DC fandom will be very telling. What projects they announce, what projects they don't announce, such on and so forth. How sort of like deep the coverage is from them in terms of like how far they get into like whatever their quote unquote publishing plan is going to be. Now because of everything that's gone on with the. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, there actually is some fandom news out there as well. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or you want to talk about something else, but there is some news regarding DC fandom as well.
Well, I had this one. I thought we could, if you want, maybe we could do it first, just real quick. So this is over at We've Got This Covered. Donnie had brought this up previously. This is by David James. It was posted basically a day ago, and it says, new rumor says more Star Trek shows canceled, including Picard. So this story here says there's unease in the world of Star Trek today as rumors swirl that there's due to be a major shakeup behind the scenes at CBS. This apparently springs from Paramount Film chief Emma Watts wanting to take control of the franchise away from current producer Alex Kurtzman. The story goes that Star Trek Prodigy, Star Trek Lower Decks, Short Treks, and Star Trek Picard are all canceled. That Discovery, of course, here we go. It's all these stupid pop-ups. Good gracious. All right. The story goes that Star Trek Prodigy, Star Trek Lower Decks, Short Treks, and Star Trek Picard are all canceled. That Discovery will be wrapped up at the end of season 3, and its strange new worlds might undergo a change in production staff. If true, this would explode the future of Star Trek as we know it, and amount to practically killing off the franchise. But you may want to hold off on worrying just yet, as this information comes from, checks notes, an anonymous post on 4chan. Well, I don't know how much stock anyone reading this puts on 4chan, but as a source of information on the future, it's right up there with tea leaves, tarot cards, and inspecting the entrails of sacrificed animals. Actually, to be fair to, I'm not sure how to say that, Haru Spicy, it at least foretold the Ides of March. I mean, even 4chan users seem skeptical, pointing out that I'll never understand the level of C that takes to constantly make up fake news fantasies, that it's getting canceled again and again. You've been posting this, well, I'm going to say stuff, since STD started and definitely wasn't getting a second season. And the track records of all these sources have been abysmal. A month ago, someone was green texting that Lower Decks didn't have anything produced other than the trailer. And they were spectacularly wrong. So, again, just rumor, but this is not the only place I've heard this. And I'm saying it's not just even here. Like, I've seen versions of this being reported for a long time, that, that something major is going to happen. And we had speculated, Eric, that with the Viacom merger, where, basically they were put back together, that maybe something might change. So we'll see. We'll see. Perhaps there's something interesting still yet to happen. So I just wanted to bring it up. Of course, Donnie had actually brought it up earlier in the show. This rumor that's been kind of making the rounds. It's been making the rounds for a while. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, this, I think that it is just a rumor. I think a lot of it is wishful thinking. There's a segment of the fandom that obviously really hates New Trek and hates Kurtzman Trek. And, they want him gone. And they want to see Star Trek put in a different direction. And so I think a lot of these rumors, they're wishful thinking, and they keep coming back to it. And I don't see any real evidence of it happening. I did think it was weird. We talked about both. It was weird the way they announced Star Trek Discovery Season 3, and it was weird how we found out about Lower Decks coming on. You even made the joke, Dave, about Lower Decks. It was like, all of a sudden, it felt like CBS All Access was like, hey, Lower Decks is on tomorrow. And it was like, what? Because there was just no news up to that point. I think it was maybe like a month out when they made the official announcement. And then also they did something weird with Discovery, where they had a very big panel at Comic-Con at Home, where they basically had the entire cast. They actually did a table read, and I mean, it was like Brady Bunch on steroids. I watched some of it, and I was just like, this is almost like uncomfortable to watch. There's just too many people. And so they had this big panel with everybody involved, and then they didn't make an announcement until Monday, the following Monday, on their own, outside of the Comic-Con event, to actually say when Discovery Season 3 was starting. So there's some turmoil going on. There's some problems going on, I think, where it seems like they're not sure when to greenlit stuff, and when they're ready, when they're actually ready to do something. And I don't know. There's something confused in the marketing. But as far as like a huge shakeup, like with Kurtzman going down, I don't see it happening.
Yeah. I like I said, this is definitely rumor. This story is totally rumor. But Donnie had brought it up, and it was something I had been kind of wanting to discuss anyway, just in generalities, something else. But it's definitely a rumor. And then we do have some interesting comments in the Rogues Gallery, but I'm thinking this might be good to save for later in the show. But some interesting observations going on in the Rogues Gallery with a lot of the pop-up ads showing up. we've got this covered.
Pop-up ads are getting more attention than the actual article. That says something too about the way that these sites are set up, because it does get annoying.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, Eric, what else do you have for this week's edition of Pop Culture News?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I did want to give a little update on DC Fandom because there's been a big question on people's minds whether DC Fandom was going to change as a result of all these layoffs. And the answer is yes. Now, I can't definitively say this is the reason why, but the timing is definitely interesting. So this is a Cinema Blend article, and it says DC Fandom split into 2 days, so start adjusting your schedules. So we're going to basically have 2 events. So they're going to have one that's going to be still on August 22nd. And this one is going to be the Hall of Heroes event, or Hall of Heroes schedule. The second date, they said, is now known. The second date, however, now known as DC Fandom Explore the Multiverse, has been shifted to September 12th. So you're going to have 2. You're going to have a DC Fandom Hall of Heroes and the DC Fandom Explore the Multiverse. So Hall of Heroes is August 22nd, which is the date that, if anybody's been looking at this, that's always been the date. That's when they're going to be doing that. It says that's, I think, mostly going to be focusing on the film stuff, along with a few additions, it says, on the TV side. And then they're also going to have this DC Fandom Explore the Multiverse on September 12th. So it said this new date will work as an on-demand experience where fans can create and curate their own adventure. It says by making these 2 separate events, Warner Brothers is attempting to ensure that fans are able to see and cover everything without having panels conflict. Now, I wonder if that's a little bit of spin there. And I do wonder if this has something to do with all the different layoffs and reorganizing that's going on at DC, literally as we speak. So it is interesting that they're dividing the event. I think the primary event, the Hall of Heroes, that's probably what most people are going to be interested in, because that's where they're going to do the Wonder Woman 1984. They're going to do Suicide Squad. They're going to do the Flash movie, the Batman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. That's going to be at the August 22nd event.
Yeah. I thought it was weird they split it up, but it made sense. It's an awful lot of content to try and, have in one special. Initially because I had read some of this too, and I've been hearing some of this as well. I had originally been thinking that what they were going to do is, since they were splitting it up, I was thinking they were just going, it's like, oh, we'll just put all that comic stuff over here, and the stuff we care about will be over here in this other thing. And you know what I mean? I mean, and it would sort of like, signal what's happening, by how they program the fandom, like the whatever is covered along with the quote unquote, A level content. You know what I mean? You can go, okay, well, that's clearly their focus. And anything that's relegated to the sort of the B channel, it's like, well, the writing is on the wall maybe for this. So, we'll have to see, kind of how to. It's just weird. It's just weird, the timing of all this. It's the timing to do this, in this manner. And it's interesting. You're just scrolling through the shows. Look at the turmoil of what's happening with Batwoman. It's just, there's just all kinds of just crazy stuff going on at DC. So, I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. So,
yeah. And I'm still not quite understanding exactly what's going to be at which event, at this point. I mentioned the main highlights, I guess, of the primary event, as I think it's going to be regarded, which is the earlier one, August 22nd. And then you have the other one, which is, it sounds like it's going to focus more on the television shows, but we'll just have to see exactly what it is. Because also, I'm not sure how this whole interactive thing is really going to work with this online scheduler and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure how much people really want to do that, but we'll see.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it'll be very telling. And it also makes you wonder too, how much of this content might have actually been finished in advance, and then people were shown the door. Companies have a bad habit of doing that, having you complete this giant, huge, interesting project, and you're like, oh man, it was whatever, and it's like, oh, here's your papers, you're out of here. Like, what? Like, so it makes you wonder how much of this content might have actually been programmed before people found out that, their services weren't really needed anymore.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I definitely think this has something to do with all the reorganizations and the layoffs and stuff in terms of deciding to split the event. I personally think that is definitely part of this, that it figures into it, at least in some regard. And I did want to mention that they said here that there's also going to be a DC Kids fandom, and that's also going to be on Saturday, September 12th. So that's also interesting. So they are going to have a DC Kids fandom as well.
Interesting. And obviously that's going to be all their new, sort of YA, for lack of a better way to put it, material they've been working on, all the stuff to me that makes my eyes bleed, that's like, here's Batgirl and Wonder Woman and Supergirl, and they're at this all girls school and they don't wear their costumes, and here comes Bruce Wayne. They meet him at the dance with the boys' school across the way, and like all that stuff. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's going to be what they're going to focus on. I'm sure some people will grow up with, and love that stuff, with like a lot of the stuff that I grew up reading that I loved, finding old, Blue Beetle comics and stuff and just falling in love with that character. And then they integrate him over at DC and make a big deal. And it's like, and then you get introduced to the Question, like I'm sure there'll be some people that will love that material, but it's, as a diehard fan, the further, again, like I said, the further we deviate, what's in my mind, what makes it interesting or what really makes it what it is. I talked about this with Lower Decks. You take off the Delta shields or the comm badges, you get them out of uniforms, you put them on a ship that clearly isn't a Federation ship, and then I always find myself saying, it's like, is this still Star Trek now? Like, because this could just be a random sci-fi show. So, but I would imagine a lot of that kind of content is definitely what they're going to be covering in the kids portion, at least, because it used to be.
My kids like DC superhero girls. I know that.
Yeah,
I've got them some of the comics and things like that, and they watch some of the shows, and they're not like super into it, but they enjoy it. They're into that, and that one, they do still have the like superhero type outfits and things like that. They change them somewhat. I'm actually even looking at a picture right now, but it's like, I get that. I'll be honest though, a lot of the DC comics that I was enjoying were the like adventure type stuff, like the Batman adventures, the Superman adventures, the stuff based on the cartoons. I actually read some of my girls' Teen Titans Go comics sometimes, and a lot of times I enjoy them more than the quote unquote mainstream DC stuff. That's just me.
And I think it's because a lot of that material, when it's packaged and put together, they're thinking about presenting that to a large audience. They want as many people to hopefully like and enjoy that material as they can. So they tend to steer away from those things that I think, even in my mind anyway, visually pigeonhole it even more. So yeah. But like I said, we'll see what they do with this fandom thing. We should be getting a lot of interesting announcements, a lot of fun stuff. So. And then I think then we'll all be in a better position to make up our mind or make a decision about how we feel about, what's going on with, one of the two comic book publishers. So,
right. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Want to welcome Robert Marble. He says, hi all, PJ at Orphalation. Let me know about this stream. Robert, thank you for joining us, and please feel free to comment. We like to have interactivity on this show, so we're happy to have you here on the Rogues Gallery.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So I just had the one for pop culture this week. Do you have another story for us, Eric, or do you want to switch over to Streaming Wars?
I think we're good to go over to Streaming Wars.
All right. Very cool. Well, let's segue over and talk about Streaming Wars. Let me while I get the banner up, why don't you read Robert's comment there?
Yeah. Robert says, my family loves Teen Titans Go. Quote, how's this for a special? Space was awesome. I don't know if I said it right. And you're welcome for the welcome, Robert. It's actually my kids that really like Teen Titans Go, and so I'll a lot of times if they're watching it, I'll watch with them. I used to get them the comics all the time. There was a comic store that was like not next door, but like right on the way to the school they used to go to, and I used to go there all the time and pick up a couple comics for them. And Teen Titans Go was one of the ones I had to pick up, and that was the one they were all usually fighting over because they wanted to read that one. So, and I tried to get them into other stuff, but that's the one they wanted.
And that time period was really amazing too, because DC had, they kind of had like they were kind of like they almost had like mini imprints back then, a little small sort of like indie labels kind of within the company, because a lot of the quote unquote all ages material actually existed under the moniker of Johnny DC. Actually, we talked about this previously at San Diego Comic-Con. They used to give it all these cool buttons. One of my favorite buttons I got was actually back in the day when Johnny DC was a thing. Johnny was this weird little stick figure kind of looking guy, and he had a little cape. And I got a Johnny DC actually button one year at San Diego Comic-Con. That's still one of my favorite little DC buttons I've got. I have managed to get over the years. And that's when they were doing all the Batman animated, books. And they were doing the Justice League book. And they did the Legion of Superheroes. We don't talk about that. Legion of Superheroes cartoon. They had the tie-in comic for that. I mean, and all of that material was really great because the majority of that material was prepared by like tried and true, established veteran creators, like, just some of the workhorses in the industry that don't get a lot of attention or sometimes the love they deserve. Because for many, many years, the work that Joe Staton and Rick Burchett was always being singled out actually by the Eisner or the nomination committee, because they used to get nominated for a lot of Eisners, and they won quite a few, including Mike Parobeck too, actually for their work on the Batman Animated Adventures comic. Like that was one of the best comics just being published, regardless of the fact that it was tied into such a great animated series as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's I didn't know about that. I didn't know about Johnny DC. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can dig the button out, actually, even though I don't want to be live on the stream. Maybe I'll find a way to stick the button in the camera. So, cool. All right, so let's we're going to segue over to Streaming Wars. I'm going to set this up real quick. So here in this segment, we're going to be talking, well, let me try this again. I am struggling to get through this stuff today. Okay. So here in the Streaming Wars segment, we talk about anything that's happening in the world of, obviously, live streaming video. A lot of these fun services that we know are at war. Things such as Hulu, Netflix, the Peacock, because the Peacock is here. It finally arrived. I used to say the Peacock, it's here. I'm not watching it, but it's here. All these amazing streaming services that I know I'm enjoying, and that we hope that you, our dear valued viewer and listener, are also enjoying. So we're just bringing up anything that we found interesting, whether it was a news item, a blurb, whatever it is, anything that we think you should know about, or maybe you might enjoy discussing. That's what we talk about here on the Streaming Wars. So tell me, Erica, what do you have up first for this episode of the Streaming Wars?
My articles are really small and quick little blurbs. I'll start out with the one that I think is most relevant because obviously we're watching Star Trek Lower Decks. So we've been talking about CBS All Access and Viacom, and your rumor that you were just talking about that had to do with the bigwigs up there and possible turmoil that's going on. Well, part of that turmoil that's actually real and widely reported about is that they're doing rebranding. That was something we talked about when they did their quarterly earnings a while back, that they're definitely going to rebrand CBS All Access. So this is from AV Club, and I would say that this actually is mostly rumor after reading this article, but it does present good speculation that could absolutely be what they want to do. So it says CBS All Access might become Paramount Plus. It says because originality is overrated. And then I guess the article kind of goes back and forth about this idea of Paramount Plus because it's similar to Disney Plus, Apple Plus in terms of branding. I like it. I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to say it straight up. I would rather see Paramount Plus than Viacom CBS All Access. And to me, CBS All Access doesn't roll off the tongue that well to begin with. So I've always liked the Paramount brand in large part because of Star Trek. And I think that would be kind of interesting if that's what they went with, because Paramount obviously is a very old company with a lot of history. And I think that would be interesting if that's what the rebranding ultimately became.
Well, I mean, I can see that where the headlines going, because originality is overrated. I did not dislike the CBS All Access moniker myself. So, but you're right. We had discussed before that once the Viacom, deal went through, that they were probably going to do something. And then we covered a lot of different stories talking about all the different machinations and the things going on behind the scenes. So it makes sense they're going to rebrand. I don't have any issues with the Paramount Plus. I mean, it kind of fits with everything else anyway. I mean, they could have just, I don't have any issues with it. That sounds fine to me. So if they decide to do it, good. I'm still making my decisions totally based off of content. So as long as the content is fun and enjoyable, then I'm there. But once the content, just isn't really holding my attention, you can rebrand it all you want. It's not going to necessarily keep me around. So,
incidentally, it does bring up also the movie side of Star Trek, which Paramount has always been responsible for. They were also responsible for the television side until they broke it up, until the breakup happened at Viacom, where basically CBS took all the television stuff and Paramount took all the movie stuff, which is, I think, especially 2020 hindsight, was a really questionable and bad business decision. I don't know why they did that. And I think it actually created a lot of turmoil with Trek itself. So it'll be interesting to see if they sort of get Paramount going again, because that's really, I think, what part of this would be as well, is to try to get Paramount as sort of a viable, a viable, what's the word I'm looking for? Just a viable
option.
Not option. I'm looking for the specific, as a brand, as a viable
brand. Yeah.
To get Paramount as a viable brand again, because it really has been kind of, dragged through the mud by the division of Viacom, and then now they're back together. It's kind of almost like when East Germany first was coming back, when they unified with West Germany, and there were all sorts of questions about how is this going to work, because East Germany was so far behind West Germany. There was all this controversy about, how is this country even going to work anymore? And of course, now look at Germany. Germany is a huge success story. So can Viacom do that? I don't know. Can Viacom CBS do that? I don't know. That's the official name of the company, by the way. So it would make just as much sense to be, Viacom CBS Plus, or even Viacom CBS All Access. I don't know. But I do like the idea, at least, of getting the Paramount brand back in the forefront again. And then that kind of gives me some hope that maybe at some point we'll get a decent Star Trek film.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. I've lobbied before. I love the idea that I wish they would approach some of the streaming service content as more like the movie event, of the week, the movie of the week, or the, Saturday night, movie. Like they used to do all those things back in the day, and they were a lot of fun. And I feel like they could return to doing that, and it could be pretty amazing, because that's one of the joys about these streaming services in the first place, is the fact that you can make that content live whenever you want, and they could still build it into quote unquote this rebranding of this network or whatever. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this all shakes out. So. But we'd known they were going to be rebranding for a while. So
I'll tell you, a big part of this is that I think is because CBS All Access is just not considered one of the big players. It's just not. I pour over this kind of content all the time in these articles, and CBS All Access is almost always like not even mentioned. I mean, not even mentioned in a lot of this stuff. Now, with this rebranding idea being floated around, now I'm starting to see them get in this coverage where they were never in it before. So that to me is also telling as far as why they're doing this and what they're trying to do, because CBS All Access just hasn't had the same level of attention as Disney Plus, as even Apple Plus. Chuck says, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus. If you can't beat them, join them.
Coming soon to your portable device, Retro Rogues Plus.
There you go.
Plus what? I don't know, but we're gonna plus it. We're gonna somehow make it more valuable, more important, more of everything you need. We're gonna plus it.
Well, I think this goes back to James' remark that we didn't get to earlier. It says the fumes from the tie-dyes have warped Dave.
Well, I got news for you, James. I've been warped for a long time, so I don't think it's the fumes. I do think it's a little bit of tiredness. I tell you, tie-dye and t-shirts a little bit more work than you think. It's fun though. It's fun. So I have a Streaming Wars story, Eric, if you wouldn't mind sharing my screen. All right, so we all knew this was coming. I don't think anyone's shocked. We kind of discussed this actually a little bit the last episode. We've been speculating for quite some time because I had felt for a while that basically the writing was on the wall, and that DC Universe would probably be one of the first casualties in the streaming wars. And this is an older story, but I thought it bears worth mentioning because the Fandom event coming up. Because it's just kind of weird, because I had thought the Fandom event would probably touch on DC Universe even more, and they were just going to double down on DC Universe, and they were going to make that work, But no, definitely not going to do that. So this comes from the Business Insider. This is by Travis Clark. This was from August 16th. This weird pop-up thing's going to do something weird, but we're going to go ahead and stream through these a little bit anyway. So it says DC Universe original TV shows will move to HBO Max. What a shock, right?
I'm shocked.
What a shock.
I didn't see this coming.
So it says DC Comics publisher and creative chief Jim Lee told The Hollywood Reporter on Friday. That's funny. I think we were just talking about that. That original TV shows on the DC Universe streaming service will move to HBO Max, parent company Warner Media's new flagship streamer. Streamer is kind of an unfortunate term. I don't know if I'd use that. It makes you think of something else. The amount of content you get, not just DC, but generally from Warner Media, is huge, and it's the best value proposition, if I'm allowed to use that marketing term, Lee said. Well, obviously you are, because you just did. And May ahead of Max's launch, Business Insider reported that Warner Media was not prioritizing DC Universe, and insiders questioned the service's longevity. Got news for you, Business Insider. We've been talking about it for months. But while the service's original content will leave for Max, Lee said the DCU is definitely not going away. Yes, it is, everyone. Yes, it is. It's done. Stick a fork in it. It's done. Every story is telling us it's done. Don't believe the spin. Don't believe the spin. So speculation intensified about the future of the fan-centric DC Universe streaming service after DC was hit with massive layoffs on Monday as part of a larger restructuring for its parent company, Warner Media. The majority of the DCU staff was laid off, according to The Hollywood Reporter. The rest of this, as you get further into it, you can go over to Business Insider and read it if you would like. It just delves into a lot of stuff that we've already covered, and basically it's just more confirmation for what we had originally discussed, was the fact that basically the DC Universe content is just going over to HBO Max. The big thing for me, that what I want to know about, is this right here. But the writing has been on the wall for months regarding DCU's originals. Last year, DCU abruptly canceled its original series Swamp Thing after one season, shocking crew members. In May, ahead of the Max's launch, Business Insider reported that Warner Media wasn't prioritizing DCU. People close to service questions launch. So they're reiterating their kind of bullet point. I need to take a sip of something here before I cough. So,
yeah, this is something definitely we've been talking about quite a bit in terms of, well, Dave was always the one from the beginning when we first started doing the Streaming Wars segment. Dave always predicted that DC Universe was going to be the first big casualty.
And yeah, what I want to know about though is there's been a lot of speculation that Swamp Thing was probably going to be revived. We haven't talked about this on the show, but that the Swamp Thing show would be revived because it's clearly one of the best of the original content they created for DC Universe, and that it was probably going to show up as a part of HBO Max. There's been a lot of kind of rumors and people kind of talking. Nothing's ever really been like confirmed, you know. But that's what I want to kind of know about now. So I'm going to continue to kind of keep an eye out for this. But I'm really curious if they're actually going to try and bring that Swamp Thing show back, because that Swamp Thing show was really good. And it was an interesting deep dive into a lot of characters kind of on the sort of the magic and the fringe and the occult side of the DC universe, you know. So I personally am most curious to see if with the DC Universe content just being migrated over, you know, if we might see Swamp Thing actually make a return now. And it's weird too, because, you know, as all this was happening, we just thought it was so weird that, you know, the Snyder cut of the Justice League movie, well, that's going to be on HBO Max. It's like, well, what about, you know, DC Universe? You know, all this stuff that's going on, it's weird and it's interesting. So, we'll see. But I'm mostly curious to see what happens, if anything, with a possible return for a Swamp Thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did you hear about Aquaman, by the way? The Aquaman cartoon?
That he talks to fish?
No. The Aquaman cartoon was, I think, actually one of the first superhero cartoons ever made, at least for television. And DC actually remastered it. They actually did a remastered version of it that was available on DC Universe, and then it disappeared, and it's no longer there. And that was fueling a lot of speculation that it eventually would wind up on HBO Max, because why remaster a show and then just throw it away?
Well, and I questioned the viability, even though I enjoyed watching a lot of them when I was a DC Universe subscriber. You know, remastering the old Shazam show, the live action with, you know, Billy Batson and Mentor, and they're in the Winnebago tearing across America. And, you know, that's a very fun show, and I loved watching it as a kid. Of course, both of those productions are by the great Filmation, you know, the same animation company that was behind things like, you know, Groovy Ghoulies, you know, He-Man the Masters Universe. Just a lot of really great, you know, in the midst of all that too, you know, they did, of course, in the 60s, they did the Superman animated cartoon, which is really, really great. Surprised they didn't actually remaster that one. That's the really crazy thing. Why didn't they remaster that one? Of course, they did the New Adventures of Batman and Robin with Batmite. I know a lot of people don't particularly care for that particular show, but that's always been a favorite of mine because I grew up watching it, and I like all the funky music and the whole thing. I've always loved that particular cartoon. So yeah, some of the stuff they did with DC Universe at times seemed to be a bit extravagant. You know, like, why remaster Aquaman and why remaster Shazam? But I'll also say this too. I have the DVD copies of the Aquaman cartoons. Those Filmation Aquaman cartoons, while they get kind of wacky at times, they're a lot of fun. And I actually put them in and have them on in the studio when I'm working, you know, more than I think I would like to admit.
Well, Donnie says, I remember the 1960s animated version of Aquaman, and that's the version that I'm talking about, Donnie. And then he mentioned also, if I can find the comment there, we've actually got quite a few comments going on, but he says, I saw it as part of the Superman Batman adventures on the USA Network. And I think a lot of people, that's how they actually saw them, is when they were repackaged later on. But what's interesting is they remastered the Aquaman series. And they had it on DC Universe, and then it's disappeared. It's not there anymore, nor is it on HBO Max as, you know, yet. But again, the speculation is that eventually it's going to wind up there. And then James mentions, remember to get ready for video sales, because that could be something too. It could be something to that as well, that perhaps they're getting ready for a video release or something like that. But I found that interesting, just as far as the content that seems to be disappearing on DC Universe, and as at this point hasn't really shown up anywhere else yet.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff with what's happening with HBO Max and DC Universe, and we've discussed it before that at times it doesn't make sense in terms of a strategy. The Aquaman cartoons, remastered or not, are a lot of fun, and they're very, very enjoyable. But it does seem weird to just pull it down now if you're not immediately migrating it over to HBO Max, because then you're just pulling it down and it's just sitting on a shelf essentially for no reason whatsoever. That's the thing that I find really weird. And also too, unless somehow they intend to tie it in the Snyder Cut, which I can't imagine they're going to, I can't imagine there's like a big strategy for like the right time to re-release, using the old Disney Vault idea. I don't think there is, quote unquote, a great time to re-release the original Filmation 60s Aquaman cartoons, because for a certain segment of the potential audience, that's just not something they're going to be into.
Well, the way they used to do it is they would release it when Aquaman 2 came out.
Right, but that was
they used to do that all the time.
Right, but that was intended to be an add-on, DVD sale. The hope was, you're excited about Aquaman 2. It's not out yet, but here's the Aquaman cartoons. Well, I'll buy that. Or after it comes out on Blu-ray and DVD back in the day, it's like, oh, people are excited. Oh, Aquaman, you can go buy it now on Blu-ray, and you go out to whoever your, retailer of choice is, and you go in their store and you go, oh, cool, I'm going to get the Aquaman movie. Hey, this is cool. I didn't know they made an Aquaman cartoon. And then again, you pick it up. The idea is to, have it be like an add-on kind of a sale, which makes sense. But that just doesn't work that way anymore. The world has changed. So I don't, in my mind anyway, I don't think the logic works out that could be. It might be, but I can't imagine that's what they're actually, doing. I think for whatever reason they needed to pull it down and they don't know what to do with it, so it's just sitting on the floor. So
yeah, it's weird. It's definitely weird the way they do things like that.
And then Donnie also has another interesting comment there in regards to Filmation. He states that and Filmation co-produced the 1973 animated series of Star Trek as well. Yes, sir, you are correct. You are correct, sir. And we actually did cover Star Trek, the animated series, in our last episode. So if you're curious to see what we had to say about that, check out the last episode of the Retro Rogues Live.
Absolutely.
All right, very cool.
Absolutely.
All right, so Eric, what else do you have for this episode's streaming wars segment, or is that good?
I wanted to go back to some comments earlier that we didn't get to mostly regarding CBS All Access and the Paramount Plus issue. So Chuck was mentioning CBS All Access is not one of the major players, quote unquote. I think he's quoting me, actually. He says, indeed, but doesn't that say a lot about their programming? I mean, they own one of the most long-lived, beloved franchises in TV history, and they've done 3 new Star Trek series. They should have gained a huge audience with that, had they got Star Trek right, in my opinion. And Chuck, I tend to agree with you. CBS All Access is very defensive of their numbers. And that's the one thing that when fans are having this big debate about how popular Discovery actually is, how popular Picard actually is, how popular Short Treks actually is, how popular Lower Decks actually is, they know. They can tell us exactly how popular it is. They can tell us how many subscribers they have, and they can tell us what their views are. But these companies, they are so defensive of those numbers. And we've done some coverage in the past that Nielsen is trying to get into this. In fact, Nielsen did a thing with one of the I think Amazon Prime shows. I think it was The Boys. I think that was the one that they did where they actually did get some real numbers. But the way that Nielsen ratings works, they only go with what you see on the television. So if you're watching on your laptop or if you're watching on your phone, they don't get those numbers, But still, I thought that's a step in the right direction. That's something that I would like to see, because everything that I've seen kind of gives me the indication that CBS All Access is nowhere near as popular as they try to say it is. And that goes with the coverage as well, because like I said, when I'm looking for articles on streaming wars, it's always about, Disney Plus, Apple Plus, Netflix, somewhat Hulu, maybe Amazon Prime comes up all the time. CBS All Access very rarely comes up. And Donnie mentioned, speaking of CBS All Access, I understand that it would be rebranded as Paramount Plus. I think Donnie stepped out for a second when we were covering that, because I did bring up an article about that, Donnie, where we were talking about that rebranding. He said the reason why the Paramount name has been more recognizable than the CBS name, according to Robert Meyer Burnett. I agree with that. I think that too. I think Paramount is a much more recognized brand than CBS. I think CBS is kind of like a, kind of brand. I think that generally of all the networks, I don't think of ABC, CBS, or NBC as a brand, because they're networks. A network is a completely different thing than sort of a brand, because a network is sort of like the platform you put something on, as opposed to a studio like Paramount, where the perception is studio is, Paramount is making stuff. They're actually making stuff, creating stuff. They're not just a platform that you can throw this stuff on. And of course, what they're trying to do now is integrate all that. That's what the streaming wars is all about. So now you have studios that are directly marketing their material to the consumer, to the fan directly, as opposed to using a network.
Right. So yeah, well, this feels like a lot of this other stuff. We'll just see. We'll see how this all shakes out. I don't know. We'll have to wait.
Johnny mentioned, he said, I wish CBS All Access would have been renamed iMark, though, after one of the predecessors of CBS television distribution. It does make sense with the logo, right? iMark, that kind of thing. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that one before, but that would be interesting.
No, yeah, for sure, definitely. And it would make a lot of sense, especially with the logo. But who knows? I don't understand a lot of their decisions that they're making lately. They all don't seem to make a lot of sense to me. So
we got plenty more discussion here in the Rogues Gallery.
All right, here we go.
Chuck mentions, isn't it logical that if their Star Trek was doing great, they'd be happy to share their numbers? In fact, they'd be bragging about them, not concealing them. Possibly, because I can tell you Netflix is just as defensive of their numbers as CBS All Access is. In fact, they all seem very defensive of their numbers. And we know a lot of this stuff on Netflix is insanely popular. We know Netflix itself is insanely popular because we kind of know their subscription numbers. They're way above everybody else. But they don't share their numbers either. To me, it seems like it's almost like a weird industry standard that they have with streaming, that because Netflix never wanted to share their numbers, nobody does. And then Amanda Sand says, Chuck, I agree. Although the fact that streaming services are based on paid subscriptions rather than advertising, they don't feel any incentive to release their numbers. And Amanda Sand, you probably just hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what it is. It's because they don't have to rely on advertising, which, if you're relying on advertising, people have to know, your sponsors have to know this show is popular, and they need concrete proof your show is popular, so they'll pay for those premium ads. Without that incentive, it kind of does make sense that, streaming services based on subscriptions and not so much on ads wouldn't release their numbers. But there is a caveat to that, in that CBS All Access does have an ad-based tier. So you would think that would be relevant in terms of, releasing those numbers. I know they've got to release those numbers in some way to the sponsors. I can't imagine that they don't, because why would you want to put an ad on a show that's not doing well, especially at a premium price?
Yeah, and it's pretty standard when you're selling, an advertiser into running content somewhere, whether it's a print publication or a web publication or what have you. That you do have some numbers, some things to refer to that help you to know and feel confident that you just made a good decision. In terms of what you're trying to do, but I don't know. They're constantly seem like they're trying to kind of hide from the rest of us, so to speak. So,
Yeah, that's very true. And Donnie mentions what is currently CBS was founded 15 years after Paramount Pictures was founded, which I don't know that for a fact myself, but I do know that CBS was founded after Paramount. Paramount goes all the way back to the old studio system as one of those classic brands. And he was saying, speaking of ABC, thoughts about Disney television studio units being rebranded as 20th Television, Touchstone Television, and ABC Signature. We actually talked about that last week, Donnie. I had an article about that last week. We were talking about how basically 28th Century Fox is dead. The brand is gone now because now it's 20th Television. And part of that article, I didn't mention it that much on air, addressed the ABC Signature part of it too, with Touchstone Television, ABC Signature, because a lot of the speculation, in fact, the week before, somebody in the Rogues Gallery was speculating about whether Fox Television Studios would just become ABC Studios. And now there apparently is no ABC Studios either. There's Touchstone, like you said, and ABC Signature. So they rebranded that too. Some of those things I don't quite understand. It gets kind of weird.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. Typically when you rebrand, the whole goal is to actually, just take something and obviously make it easier to sell. Sell people on the content, sell people on, the idea, of what the network quote unquote represents or what their programming is all about. That's the whole goal. And sometimes based on some of the names that they come up with, it just sounds like random crud that came up in some kind of a corporate boardroom meeting. And there is no real sometimes thought into how the rebranding is going to play out with people in terms of relatability, and in terms of actually being able to, again, help sell the core concepts of the network or the programming or whatever it is they're trying to sell. As much as they leaned into Star Trek, I was surprised that there wasn't even any hint of anything Star Trek-ish in the name for All Access. All Access sounds pretty clinical compared to the kind of content that they were trying to promote and push.
Yeah, they have a lot of different content though there as well. That's kind of the problem. It's kind of like, for instance, with like DC Universe, they were being very kind of specific, with what they were trying to push. But when you do something like what CBS All Access is doing, that's a massive shotgun approach that they have. There's a lot of different stuff on CBS All Access. It's not just Trek.
Right. So I turned my cam on here because I had made this comment earlier. This is a Johnny DC button, Eric. We were talking about that earlier. If I see if I can
right in the light.
Right in the light. You can't see it. What happened? Oh, now I'm really in the dark. Hold on.
There you go. I can see it now.
There you go. Can you see that?
Yep. So that's the Johnny DC. That's the old DC kid brand.
Yep. That's the all ages stuff. Was branded Johnny DC, and it was this little stick figure, kind of shapy looking kind of guy with the DC logo. See, the DC logo looks like it's a word balloon.
Yeah.
Got a little cape. Yeah, that was Johnny DC. That was what that publishing imprint or brand was. It was doing, Batman animated adventures and all that kind of stuff. So
that's interesting.
It was so weird because like within the industry, we all knew it was called Johnny DC, and we all knew and understood what they were doing. Yet for some weird reason, they just never really they pushed the branding very much. But then when you're at something like San Diego Comic-Con, they're giving out buttons, they're pushing really hard on it. But a lot of other people, they probably didn't even realize it even existed. So
I didn't, and I consider myself a DC guy. And Had no idea. Never. I don't think I've ever seen that logo before. So it is an interesting. It kind of relates exactly to what we're talking about. A brand,
in a manner, yeah.
How it doesn't work sometimes. Sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting. Donnie mentions that Disney phased out the Fox name to avoid confusion with the Fox Corporation. And yes, they absolutely did. I think a lot of people don't understand that, because I think what a lot of people don't understand is that Fox News still exists. The actual Fox network still exists. Fox Sports still exists. So the Fox name is still out there. And it makes sense to me that Disney would want to try to avoid some of that confusion, because that brand does still exist. That company still exists.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting, and it, like I said, it to me it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Sorry, I had a glitch, and so I didn't hear what you were saying, and then I started talking.
Oh, no, I was just saying that I was just kind of reiterating what we've kind of stated, that sometimes when they do this kind of stuff, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I'm actually going through this bag and finding all kinds of examples of this basic idea of where they're trying to lean into and then build a brand or establish something in a certain manner, but it never really either clicks with people or it doesn't work in the manner in which they want, or also as well, it just doesn't click, because it doesn't feel like it's really relatable. And then there's other examples of things where it does click with people and they like it and it looks like it's going to stick, and it's an interesting reinterpretation of something and people grow to really like it. And then they friggin' change it overnight, and you get the stupidest reasoning for why they felt they needed to do it. And then I had an example of it, and I dropped it back in the bag here, and I can't find it. But I was going to show, when DC did the New 52, there it is. When DC did the New 52, and they kind of rebranded, DC for what it represented. They were using this logo here. Let's see if I can get it in camera. They were using this look. Well, hold on. Wow, that light's so strong. All right. Well, you guys can kind of see it. Yeah, it's the DC with the little swoosh with the star, and people really liked it. And I know the professionals that were working on the titles at the time really liked it. It was really seemed to really kind of click with people. Can't seem to get in the light the right way, but anyhow, you guys can find it online and see it. But it worked really well. And then for reasons that no one could really explain to me, they decided to up and change it. And then we got the that kind of works like that. And then we got the weird page turning one or whatever they called it, that they said theoretically they did it because they wanted it to click and relate more with the movies and the comics, because they wanted to make sure people knew they were still publishing comics. So they said they came up with that new logo, that new page turning logo, and they're still using it, but I don't feel like that ever clicked, because they didn't really use the whole page turning aspect of that logo very much. They used it a little bit and then they stopped using it. So what was the point?
Yeah.
This other one they came up with, everybody liked. What was the point in rebranding something when you just rebranded it? You literally just rebranded it, and now you're rebranding it again. Why? So there you go. Doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And they do a lot of weird things like that. It's pretty funny.
All right. So very cool. Do you have anything else for Streaming Wars, Eric, or do we think we're good to move on to our second feature of the evening?
We're getting pressed for time here, so.
All right. Well, there you go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to put these buttons away. All right. Let's go ahead and set it up. So unfortunately, I don't have a Monty Python and the Holy Grail special graphic. My apologies, but we'll be back to better form hopefully next week. So here in our Rogues Retrospective, we're going to be talking about Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I think a lot of our hopefully members of Rogues Gallery are familiar with this film. Originally, this was released on April 27th of 1975. It was directed by Terry Gilliam, Terry Jones, and if you watch the credits, they seem to suggest it was directed by a whole bunch of people. That's part of the gag, is actually the opening credits, actually, for this film. I'm going to do the synopsis here real quick, then we'll talk about what we consider kind of comprises a Rogues retrospective, and then we'll get right into this second feature topic. Okay, so a comedic send-up of the grim circumstances of the Middle Ages is told through the story of King Arthur and framed by a modern-day murder investigation. When the mythical king of Britain leads his knights on a quest for the Holy Grail, they face a wide array of horrors, including a persistent black knight, a three-headed giant, a cadre of shrubbery-challenged knights, the perilous castle Anthrax, a killer rabbit, a house of virgins, and a handful of rude Frenchmen. So again, this I think for most people that are familiar with this film, they would consider this probably like a comedy classic. So let's go ahead and talk about what actually comprises a retrospective. Well, simply enough, a Rogues retrospective basically starts off with us talking about how we first heard about the film, our original thoughts were when we originally saw it, and then after that, since we have actually recently rewatched the film, we just talk about how we feel about the film today. And whatever manner that takes us, whether we're talking about relevancy, whether we're talking about it as still funny or not, because primarily we're talking about comedies here, since we're actually talking about Lower Decks as our main feature. So we want to talk about comedies and hopefully things that are funny. So to start off with, tell me, Eric, how did you first hear about Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Well, I say this story a lot. Basically, I think it was from my brother. I think my brother was sort of quoting some lines from the movie and things like that and talking about it because he had seen it. I don't know if he saw it in the theater. I feel like he might have saw it like at cable at a friend's or something like that. I don't know for sure how he saw it. I didn't see it in the theater for sure. It was a little bit before my time in terms of that, but I think he had picked it up somewhere. I think it was popular with his crowd when he was in high school, and then as I got older, people that I knew had seen it and would quote lines from it and all those kinds of things. And I just remember that. I just remember people telling me stories about this crazy movie, and different scenes in it all the time. Obviously they would quote the the fight with the Black Knight quite a bit, things like that. I would just remember growing up with that. And the funny thing is, I don't remember when I first actually got to see this. I don't remember what the circumstances were. Like I said, I know it wasn't the theater. It wasn't sort of like some sort of revival or re-release or anything like that. I'm just guessing somebody along the way finally showed it to me. And I by that time, I think I had already heard the entire movie from other people because, again, it was just such a quotable movie and people were always talking about it. And all sorts of different aspects, the holy hand grenade, like I said, the fight with the Black Knight, just all sorts of things that people would just constantly be talking about. So the funny thing is, I don't actually remember the first time I actually saw this movie. I know it was a while ago. I know that. I just don't remember the entire circumstance.
Well, I had seen bits and pieces of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I remember seeing it kind of on television. I was very, very young. But I always confused this movie with, the Monty Python's Flying Circus, the kind of sketch comedy, show where for me, the bit that always sticks out the most is no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. So for some reason in my mind as a kid, I always just assumed that a lot of these bits, with King Arthur coming over the hill and the guy's got the coconuts and he's clapping them together like it's a horse, trotting behind him. I always, for some reason, thought these were just skits that were part of the Flying Circus show that they had done. because no one really told me about Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It was just sort of something that just people were aware of. I remember the first few conventions I went to, it was a big thing because people were constantly quoting this film, You know, for example, like Jim Lee's interviews in the press would have been more interesting if he's, you know, talking about, you know, what's happening to DC, if he just said, "'Tis a flesh wound," you know, so it's just a scratch. So, you know, it's just one of those things. It's like everyone was constantly quoting it. And I didn't realize it was actually a movie until I think probably about the second or third Memphis Fantasy Convention I went to, and people kept quoting things. And I'm like, that's from the Flying Circus show, right? And like, no. That's from the Holy Grail movie. I'm like, that's a movie? So my friends were like, they were shocked that I'd never seen it. And so we actually rented it on VHS, and that was how we watched it. And I was he's a freshman or sophomore in high school, and that was kind of the first time I sat down and actually watched the film and realized this is a movie. I thought it was just little weird bits that came from the show, and I was falsely under the assumption that that's what it was. You know, they were just sketches, you know, and it is so weird because as a kid, obviously we weren't watching the whole movie. We were just watching bits and pieces of it. And then we would, you know, change the channel off to something else. So it's just, I don't know, that it sounds weird, but that's kind of the thing. It was just around. People were constantly quoting it. I had seen bits on TV, but I didn't even realize actually it was a movie. So, so we've talked about how we first discovered Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So let's do this next one, Eric, and then we can take some comments from the Rogues Gallery over here. I see everyone's having a lot of fun with this topic, and then after that, we'll segue into our actual retrospective portion and talk about how we feel about the film today. So, do you remember your initial impressions when you originally saw it, Eric?
No, I really don't. I know. I mean, part of the reason I suggested that we review this is because obviously I had seen it at some point, and I thought it was funny. But I don't remember when I first watched this. I just don't. I have no memory of the first time I watched this. I just know it was a while ago. Kind of like you were saying, lots of other people were always talking about it. They had seen it. I was that guy that had never seen it. And eventually that changed, and I finally did see it. I cannot remember for the life of me the circumstances.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that for me, my initial impressions, I remember when I saw it, is there were bits I had seen. There were bits that I felt like I had seen because people had partially reenacted them in front of me at the convention. There were things I didn't realize that people were quoting this movie. They've been quoting this movie at me my whole life. And it was just an interesting, sort of weird, like surreal experience. It was sort of like watching something and going, oh, that's where all this comes from. I had no idea. So I remember that was my initial impressions. I thought it was funny at times. There was a few times I remember as you know, even as a freshman, sophomore, I don't have problems with accents necessarily, but sometimes the references sometimes would hit me kind of weird. You know what I mean? Just because, and I would assume partially it's because of the time period in which the film was made. You know, it just was made for kind of a different audience and a different time. But I remember liking it. I remember laughing at it. And I remember sometimes being a little dumbstruck going, wow, that comes from this. So along those same lines, Chuck Marble's over here in the Retro Rogues, and he's throwing on tons of quotes actually from the film. So let's go ahead and start off with the first one. He says, some of my favorite lines ever. Strange women lying and pawns distributing swords is no system for a basis of government.
Come on, you gotta have a better English accent than that, Dave.
All right. Give me just a second.
Strange women, lying pawns, distributing swords. There's no system for the basis of government.
All right, okay. Let me give it another shot. She turned me into a newt. I got better.
There we go.
All right. Do you want to do the next one, or do you want me to do it?
You do it. You're on a roll.
Okay. Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries.
Wrong accent.
Wrong accent.
Guy. Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries.
All right. So, yeah, that's right. One day all this will be yours. What? The curtains? This is actually the one I think I like the most. And she's got huge tracts of land. So,
come on, you gotta love that British humor. It's just there's just something about it. Now Chuck said something also interesting here. You said Monty Python and the Holy Grail, one of the greatest comedies ever. Thank Pink Floyd and George Harrison. And I wasn't sure what you meant, Chuck, so I was looking it up. And apparently, the film was financed by Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and Genesis. And there's also some indication that Elton John might have been involved also in financing this film. And I have a quote here from Wikipedia that, according to Terry Gilliam, he said that he got all these rock stars to finance the film because at the time it was a good tax write-off. So that's how he got people to invest in this film. But George Harrison is not listed in this article that I have here. So, Chuck, if you have something else about that, I'd be interested to know. But apparently that this film was financed by all these rock stars who were just looking at a way to have a write-off for their taxes.
Well, that's interesting. Bobby, talking about the retrospective aspect of it, Bobby said this, says, my dad showed me this when I was 12. When I saw the woman beating the puddle of water in the background with a big stick for no reason, I laughed so hard I almost passed out. Yeah, there you go. Bring out your dead bodies. So, and then Chuck actually states, he says, I was a teen during Monty Python's time on TV, so I eagerly awaited Holy Grail, especially when one of my favorite bands, Pink Floyd, financed it. It's an interesting aspect of this film that I didn't know anything about at all. I didn't realize that so many of these rock groups and rock stars had a hand in financing the film. When this movie was made in the 70s, there was a lot of discussion about who was financing films. There's a lot of speculation that where some of the money came from that financed things such as Superman the movie. Where it was that I think it was Alexander Salkind, not Ilya, where Alexander Salkind found that money. Because Superman was an expensive film to make. And his son in interviews often talks about how his father had an amazing talent for it in terms of talking people into investing into these projects. But sometimes too, when it makes you wonder, how much of that money came off shores and what that money previously had been used for or where it had come from. So I wonder if Superman would have approved. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I've heard some of those stories as well. Superman. Yeah.
And then Chuck goes on to state, he says, Pink Floyd famously stopped their recording sessions during Dark Side of the Moon every time Monty Python came on.
I was not aware of that. I did not know
Interesting factoid. So now that we've kind of talked about how we first learned about the film, or in some cases are kind of not quite sure how we first learned about the film, because it seems like it's been around forever for some of us. What are the other aspects in order for it to be a retrospective? Is we have to talk about how we feel about the film today. Having just recently watched it, tell me, Eric, how do you feel about Monty Python and the Holy Grail today?
Well, it's a classic. It's a classic for a reason. It is also a cult classic. It wasn't terribly successful when it first came out. It did. I was looking it up, the numbers. It said about $500,000 to make it. They made about $5 million, which I guess was pretty good, back in those days, but certainly not like a huge film. And it's interesting. I was looking at some of the old reviews, and there was a lot of bad reviews, for this film at the time. Gene Siskel didn't like it, for instance. But it's definitely a cult classic. It's endured over a long period of time, and you can see why. If you watch the film today, it's available on Netflix. That's one of the reasons that we decided to review it, because it is widely available on Netflix right now. If you want to check it out, if you've never seen it, um, it's all about those lines, just like what Chuck was doing and having some fun with it. There's just a lot of funny lines, and the delivery is done really well. These guys are like, comedic masters, the Monty Python folks. So they were really good at delivering the lines, and they make you laugh. The one thing that is kind of funny, though, is you can definitely feel the influence of sketch comedy on this movie. The plot, such as it is razor thin, and a lot of the stories don't seem really connected to each other. So it definitely does have that feeling of a sketch show that was made into a movie, with, in the background of medieval England, or I guess Dark Ages England, actually, So anyway, it's a fun movie, and it's interesting, and it's classic for a reason. I think it's all about the lines and the delivery.
Well, I was tempted to actually do this portion with an attempt to do it with an English accent, talking about how I feel about the film today, but I don't know how much I want to offend everyone. But I think it can't be sort of understated. Of course, the culture, the classic cult nature of the film. Among those people who still quote it and love it and keep it alive and introduce it to new people, they're very fanatical about it, and they quite love the film. Having recently watched it, it just felt classic to me. It just felt like a classic movie, regardless of what, Siskel Ebert or whoever else might have thought of it back in the day. I mean, it just feels classic. That I think that'd be the best way to kind of sum it up for me. I remember too, going back and reflecting just a little bit, I do remember too, part of the thing, because you mentioned, Eric, about the idea of the plot being kind of razor thin, and you can see that it's kind of built on, kind of a sketch comedy. Along those same lines, I remembered as a again, like a freshman, sophomore in high school, when I first actually sat down and watched the whole film in its entirety, I remember I was kind of stunned at the fact that they did delve as much as they did into kind of the Arthurian legends that surround the story of the Grail. Because I remember as a kid, my mom had got me a book, and it had a kind of a recounting of the Grail stories, from the Arthurian legends, and it broke down the different trials and travails, of the various knights, like the story of the Green Knight and, the Red Knight, and their different adventures or whatever that led them to, either discovering or not, in some cases, discovering the Holy Grail. I was shocked at how this film does touch on that, because you wouldn't think that that's necessary. Even though they call it the Holy Grail, they don't have to delve that far into the Arthurian legend. But even though they had kind of poked fun at it, and kind of take some liberties, obviously, it's still kind of, I remember being kind of dumbstruck that, and found it interesting that they at least cared enough about the Grail mythos to actually do that, right? I mean, I think a lesser group would have just just kept the sketch comedy bit going, and not even worrying with keeping the narrative for the Grail there. So I found that was really interesting, because a lot of times when you see other productions that tells the Arthurian legend, whether you want to look at the musical Camelot, whether you want to look at the classic film, in my mind, Excalibur, whenever they touch on the Grail, if they do, they don't really dwell on the whole, the different, the quests by all the various knights and all the things that they supposedly experience. It actually comes from the original Arthurian legends. So there should be a lot of credit given for that. Even though they have fun with it, it's interesting that they actually took the care and the time to even do that.
Well, the reason for that, I can guarantee you, the reason for that is that Terry Jones, one of the members of the Flying Circus, he was regarded as an actual world-class historian.
Well, there you go.
books on medieval history and things like that.
Yeah, there you go. It makes a lot of sense. And like I said, that was the thing that's interesting. Even though they're having a bit of fun with it, they're actually trying, to actually, be faithful, to the stories to an extent, and that's interesting. That's kind of cool that they did that. So,
well, Chuck mentions Holy Grail seems like a silly comedy, which it does, but it has tons of social and political commentary in it. Tons. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, having actually recently rewatched it, to me, it just feels like a classic film. I would say that if you haven't seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you should give it a go. I mean, you should really check it out and watch it, because I think if you're not terribly familiar with it, or if you've had people quote lines at you and you hadn't seen it, I definitely think it's worth watching it and getting to experience this film. I mean, to me, when I watch it, all I can think of is this is the definition of classic comedy. I mean, it just, to me, it's that's what it is. It goes on the same shelf and well, maybe I better not make that comparison in case I offend anyone, but I would put on the same shelf as a lot of other great comedy films that I have always loved. It just feels classic to me, even having recently watched it. So that's what I would say is if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check out Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I actually watched it on Netflix. It's on Netflix. So if you have Netflix, you can watch it there. I think, Eric, you also watch on Netflix, correct?
Yes.
Well, there you go. If you got Netflix, it's a real simple, easy watch. You do a search. If it doesn't come out, you do a search and you go watch it. So check out. It's a horrible accent. I should stop. So definitely check out Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That's my recommendation. Would you recommend it as well, Eric?
Yes, and I do want to point out, just reiterating what Chuck said. This is one of the reasons that I've been kind of suggesting that we kind of put something to contrast with Lower Decks. And I don't know how long I can continue this to figure out what else to put there. I like to see comedy done right. I like comedy to make me laugh, and I think there is room for social commentary in comedy, and a lot of comedy does have good social and political commentary. And even as like Chuck said, even as silly as this is, they do a good job with that. Whereas Lower Decks, which is a Trek show, I don't think is doing a good job at that. And so it's one of those things to kind of, if you haven't seen it, check it out. If it's been a while since you've seen it, check it out and think of that. If you've seen Lower Decks and you watch this, think about that. Think about how is comedy supposed to work? How does it actually work? Blah, 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 blah. Because there is a contrast between these two in a very interesting way.
Well, very cool. All right. Well, if that seems, that I started to do a British accent again, I better stop. So if that seems good to you, maybe we could go ahead and look at maybe wrapping this episode up.
That sounds good to me.
All right, there you go. All right. So I want to thank you for watching or maybe even listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues. Again, my name is Dave Beatty. I have been one of your hosts. You can see some of my art and learn more about me actually at my website, but these days I'm all about Kirby. Well, see, look at the banner switching over. So now I'm confused a bit. Let me see if I can figure this out. Well, anyhow, if you want to see some of my work and learn more about me, you can obviously visit my website, which that is www.davebeatty.com. That of course is DAVEBEATY.com. Boy, I really goofed that up pretty good. But primarily, I want people to go check out what we're doing over there at Kirby Tees. KirbyTees.com. That's KIRBYTS.com. There you can find the official Retro Rogues merchandise as it currently exists. We've got some t-shirts and different things there. If you feel so inclined to want to support the show, please purchase one and show us that you like what we're doing here, and encourage us to keep going. Greatly appreciate that. So that's going to be it for me. So tell me, Erica, please let the folks know where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
I'm most active on Twitter, and that's at BassGod14. That's at BASSGOD14. My DMs are always open, so if you have show suggestions, things you would like us to check out, let me know, because I'm always open to that kind of stuff. And that is also, by the way, BassGod14 is also the official YouTube and also the official Twitch for the Retro Rogue Show. And then we have a few more comments from folks. You folks are far too kind, far too kind. Bobby Chambers says, thanks for another great show, gents. Chuck says, enjoyed this. Thanks, guys. Jane also says, very enjoyable show. And then Chuck had two comments that I want to leave the folks with. Chuck said, in my opinion, Lower Decks is the first CBS Trek show to actually use established Trek continuity, but the humor really falls. And he also wanted to make a clarification that when he was talking about George Harrison, he financed the follow-up to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is The Life of Brian, which maybe that's something that we will review in the future. So with that, we will leave our viewers